I want so much video benchmark reviews, tests and stuff like that. And this could do some damage for a minute, and it could stream as well, man, because of the video card. So this actually got a 1060 GTX 1060 graphics card, 16 RAM. There it is, y'all. There it is. You see the keyboard? You know, it looks like a gaming laptop, the whole nine. Alright, so as I said, this is mainly for streaming, but of course I'll be able to play some games as well. And don't worry, man, I'll give you all a full review. I see a bunch of reviews that's already on YouTube. Y'all can check it out if y'all thinking about getting a laptop for gaming or streaming. This is the one, man. Alright, so this is what DDR4 16 RAM, 16 gigs RAM. This is 250 or something, you know, solid state. And it got I actually bought a 1 terabyte hard drive as well to add it to it, because it got an open slot where you could actually add an additional hard drive. So y'all see, I could barely speak, man. I'm just excited, y'all. I'm just so excited for this right now. Alright, so I'm gonna give it a test. I got a little mouse there as well, of course. So, you know, I might try some Fortnite on it as well, man. I might get me in some Fortnite. So, let me know what y'all think, man. Check out the reviews online if y'all thinking about getting something like this. I actually recommend this already because I'm sweating as warm as hell again. So I actually recommended it to one of my friends already. Because of the amount of research I did on this, and this by far, because the price right now is like $1,050, like $1,049 or something like that. But I actually got it on a sale. Alright, my friend, the same one that I recommended it to told me when Amazon had a sale, so I did pay less. I'm not going to tell you all the exact price because it's probably going to make y'all feel a little salty right now. Okay, but I did get it on a little sale, a little discount, but I would have bought it either way. But me getting the discount only got me to buy it faster, right? So let me know what y'all think, man. I'm excited for this. I'm excited to test it out. Of course, I'm gonna test out playing probably Fortnite on the screen, and probably test it out on my monitor and see how it operates, bro. But I'm really excited, bruh. Look at this. Yeah. So you already know your boy Sim. I'm just keeping y'all updated, of course. You know, quality gonna be improving, of course, with recording and streaming and the whole nine. Y'all know what it's about. So don't forget, if you're first time to my channel, like the video, share the video, hit your button, subscribe. If it's not your first time, like the video, share the video. I'm excited, y'all. You never know who's gonna help. Your boy Sim, one love, respect. Bless up.
Damn. Need to get that shit all up. Almost, man. It's pretty nice. Yo, we showing this supposed to. We not though. They coming back now. Oh, what? ATL, what the fuck is you doing, nigga? Nigga, you can't stay. You want nothing to do. You can't hold him. Damn, dude. Yo, these niggas got us to the lead. Hold us, man. What the fuck? Oh, shit. Oh my god. Oh. this. Fuck this. Look, doing that. Doing that. I'm playing this and this. I'm playing that. She has dust. No. Oh, that was so fire too. She just took that shit out. Damn. Join that. In the face. Join that. Run that. Run that. Ah, man. Alright. I just get out there. And you're listening my. And Jesus looking good tonight. Jesus looking good. And Jesus looking good. And Jesus good. My. Now you got the blood tonight. Oh my god, bro. You should be hearing that. What the fuck? Oh goodness, dude. Are you serious right now? You're supposed to hear that. If these niggas come back and win, come on, man. Oh, what? Then we'll go. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So that's the case. Why the fuck she asking you for help? Love beside the queen, man. Why? No, that's beside the queen. And they change their feeling. Mm-hmm. Oh my god, what the fuck? Oh my god, what is wrong? They're my own clean on. They're my own clean on. They're my own clean on. My own clean on. Doing that. Oh, match. Oh my god. Oh wow. He's trying to stab on me. He's trying to stab on me. Oh, he's trying to stab on me just now. I'm gonna stab back. That's me out. Yes. Let's go, V. Let's go. It's justice. Justice, justice. Ah, look at that. Oh, oh, yeah, do that. What you told you? Tonight will be a special night, no matter where the breeze goes. Damn. Tonight will be a special night, no matter where the breeze goes. I'm so happy, yes, I just got a little go. Damn, what's happening? Come on, man. Show that. Ah. Oh, fuck that. Oh, shit. Come on, man. Wow. Please don't shoot that. That? Oh. Tonight will be a special night. No matter where my dreams go. I'm so glad that you know. I just wanna block your shit. The yellow saying block, 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 block. My shadows looking good tonight. Na 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 na. Blah blah. You know what I'm saying? Blah blah. All night long. You don't take the even when it's strong. Oh no. It feels good. Take him to school. 'Cause that's what we do. We take him to school. 'Cause that's what we do too. So far away, special night. No matter where we go, street was there, I'm sure you know. We just had a block of shot. I think I really ma. The sun is just now. Sure, that. Join that shit. Come on, we down. What is he on our team? That's crazy. Mm-hmm. What? You put the pass and you were going. What the fuck are you doing? Oh my god. Wow. I don't know what is happening. Thank you. I'm like, yo, yeah, yeah, some kind of balls on the board right now. This is looking crazy. Jordan that. Jordan that. Jordan that. Gotta be a somebody. Yo, yo, yo. Cloak. Clark. Cloak. Tonight, nigga. Tonight I'll be a dozen right. And the world night. I'm so glad that you know. Just gotta feel the shit. You can't be singing. Jordan that. Man, these knuckleheads out here, they can't do shit for you. I'm telling you. You don't need that shit right now. Yeah, give it to her real. That's why she fuck with me. Fuck that down. Give it to her real. Give it to her real. Now, wow. You're watching in school, right? All right, good. You know, said many good things about you in school, so don't let him do that. Yeah, that's crazy right there. He's got the whole team with that. That's crazy. Like this is really like whoever this. That's it. We got it. We got it. We got it. We got it. Dude. Yo, 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 yo. That's yo. See. Yeah. That's the whole job. You know what I mean? Oh, last team in August. Shit. That's I think a year is you know. Basketball job. Yeah. Basketball job. Think we having two passes in the game. Oh shit. Oh shit is running. Oh shit is running. Wow. Oh shit running. Oh shit running. Oh shit running. Yeah. Jordan. Hey now. Oh shit. This is like shit right now. Tonight is so long. Oh man. That is crazy. Oh, fuck. Uh, uh, we can't let him score that forward. He's playing 2 for 0 for this shit right now. Oh, shit. Damn, man. That's fucking crazy. Yo, come on, man. You nigga got right in that bitch, son. So, well, Will's the king. He just need to adapt. He's always what's up, man? There's a lot of short people right now. I always play this game of the shit anyway. Nah, I'm not really good at that. We want sticks though. I, I used to when I was over here. I was trying for the team, but I should have tried out. That's one thing in my life I do regret. I did think I would have made it. I was pretty good at defense. Yeah.
I want you to get this right now. There's a reason why I have this on. This is a homage. I don't know if it's a panther, but it's close enough. And the reason I have it on because this man has been absolutely amazing. Now I know you may think that everything that happened to him happened overnight, but this man has been at it for a long time. I mean, you talk about James Brown, you talk about Thurgood Marshall, you talk about Jackie Robinson, and every time I see him, he gets it done. Please start getting your Wakanda on right now. And welcome, Chadwick Boseman. Oh, my God, my God, my God. First of all, man, I want to thank you for coming. I sat with you in my house. Right. And I'm looking in your eyes, and I know what's about to happen to you. I don't know if you knew.
Nah, I didn't know. I didn't know if people would be receptive to the culture. I think we had to create a culture.
Like when you say culture, like when you didn't know we would get Africa.
Right. It had to be connected to a authentic ritual and spirituality so that it stayed in the movie.
Yes.
The studio wouldn't cut it out because you don't have an authentic Black Panther without that.
Wow.
Well, I remember also being with you and you introduced me to, it was an older brother, and you said, he's the new Black Panther. He was like, y'all do the Black Panthers? Y'all got UEP, y'all got Black Panther. I said, who you playing? And my hair wasn't long at that point. He said, you need to grow your hair long because the hair froze. Because I was like, whoa.
Yeah, my pops and all them had put their black leather caps on them, and we going to stand for the cause for Black Panther. I'm like,
it's a different.
It's a different.
It's not the same one. It's not the same one.
When you saw the box office, what was the feeling now that you are, take this in, Mr. Boseman, the third highest grossing movie of all time? Everybody that ever turned their camera on and said action and cut, you're gonna kick their ass.
Right. I think that's the part where I feel a sense of fulfillment because I don't care about what the numbers are. I've had the studio tell me, well, we can't put your picture on the international poster because that doesn't work overseas. That still exists. That idea still exists. So to see the international numbers along with the domestic numbers, and they're like almost the same.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That was the thing about it for me that made me go, aha. You know, I don't often do that, but just like,
it felt good. It felt good to do it. And you know what? It's so real. I seen some people who actually went to Travelocity. I don't know if you heard about this.
Yeah.
And are trying to go to Wakanda.
Yeah.
Oh, you feel what I'm saying? Like, you're that good that Black folks like, hey man, spring break, we going to Wakanda. We going to Wakanda on spring break. And I'll tell you, I see you when you in the thing. I see you doing your stunts.
Yeah.
That thing look real. Because a lot of times, you know, they try to teach the star and they don't really get it off. You box for real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if anybody run up in the club,
It's a problem.
Have you ever had a real toss-up?
Yeah.
So cool. It was lights out.
It was quick.
Ooh, you see the confidence? Don't run up on the Panther.
Yeah, don't run up on the bed.
Don't run up on.
Bodyguards is to protect you from me.
Is it gonna be like the new cast, or is it gonna be? That's what I want to know. How many cast is it gonna be? Like new cast, or is it gonna be a regular
And I
cast?
appreciate this again. Here we are off script. I know, you know what I'm saying? This time is precious. But I gotta ask you, teach me how to speak Wakanda.
You already can do it. What you saying?
So we got some words here from movies.
Okay, so you're gonna need a bigger bow.
Okay.
You're gonna need a bigger bow. How would I say that in Wakanda?
So I wouldn't do the gunner. I would change it to you are going to need it.
I got French. You're going to need that big apple.
You updated with
Okay, Franklin, my dear, I don't give a damn. It's from
update the shit.
Gone with the Wind.
I want to see if you can do that.
Franklin, my dear,
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to give a damn.
You sound like sort of like Sidney Poitier.
Frankly, I don't give a damn. Okay, you talking to me or Bon James?
Talking to me? You talking to me?
That's how I do it?
Yeah, no. I'm just
Okay, you're talking to me? You're talking to me? How do I do that?
You're talking to me.
You're talking to me.
You're talking to me.
I am talking to you.
You're talking to me.
I am talking to you.
You're talking to me.
I will talk to you.
Oh, you talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, Black Panther 2, baby.
An actor or someone that you saw that made you say, yo, I gotta go do that.
Ooh, you're one. Oh, you're one. De Niro, Taxi Driver, Godfather, Michael Fredo's, all the Michael Fredo scenes. Yeah.
Fredo, you broke my heart, Fredo.
See, you got it. You broke my heart.
I'm smart.
Yeah.
Fredo,
all
to
those
me,
scenes.
to me, Fredo was one of the most important characters.
Well, he's an amazing actor too. Yeah, so you very don't often pay attention to the person who's playing the weaker character. Just looking at film and seeing like what is a good performance.
Oh,
it's not always about the person who's, who has like the huge spectacle moments. In Ray, you and Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah.
In Ray, I love Will Smith in that movie too.
Yeah.
But
you mean Ali?
Yeah, look, stop saying Ali.
I'm sorry.
Ali. That's what did it. That's what did it. Yeah.
When you was in Titanic?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
No.
And Ali, Jeffrey Wright has, plays his brother and has like 2 lines in the movie. And so, looking at your performances in that movie, it's one of my favorite.
You went to Oxford?
I did, yeah. The great Felicia Rashad, she suggested that we take this classical training course in Oxford, and it cost quite a bit of money. And so she basically went to her friends and was like, I have a group of like 9 students, and they need some benefactors.
Wow.
And none of us really knew who paid for us because they did it anonymously. Then later on, I received a letter that said, "This is your benefactor." So I was like, "What? This is Washington's name on there?" You got an address that's where you can write him, Mr. Denzel Washington. Thank you so much for I was still in college.
I had my own Denzel story. I couldn't get into the Roxbury back in the day, and Denzel was coming out to Roxbury. And black people march when they get excited. I was like, and I went to grab him, and he did some kind of elbow move to the neck. Hold on, calm down. Yeah. Calm down. All right. I'm just got to give you your props. Anyway, my man, thank you so much.
Yo, thank you for having me. Yo.
Anytime. We'll take this and come to wherever you are, and you're on the set. We'll come get it. Listen, Infinity Wars is out. It's killing right now.
Yes.
And we're going to check out a trailer to let you know how hot it is right here on our script.
Dread it. Run from it. The end is near. We're going to need some help. How you been, Buck? Not bad. For the outer world.
He brought back!
fight for one life. We fight for all of them.
Avengers Infinity War.
When you said we were going to open Wakanda to the rest of the world, this is not what I imagined.
What did you imagine?
The Olympics? Maybe even a Starbucks?
Everywhere April 27th.
I care for it. That's heavy stuff.
Welcome to the world of Hendrix Gin. Only infused with rose and cucumber. Undeniably peculiar. Is near.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the studio with us today, I'm going to allow DB, as he's lost sleep this entire week, knowing that these guys were going to be here this morning to do the honors. Ladies and gentlemen, the directors of a movie with a budget of over $320 million has now made, in 1 week, $857 million worldwide. It is the second highest grossing film of 2018 behind Black Panther, and in its opening weekend it grossed $641 million. Anthony and Joe Russo, the directors of Avengers Infinity War.
Wait, this is motherfucking real, man.
Captain America Civil War, Captain America Winter Soldier, and they even got a shot from our good friend Ron Howard to direct the pilot of Arrested Development. That's right. So they got some pretty cool friends. Yes. Welcome them to the show, Anthony and Joe Russo, ladies and gentlemen. Wow. Thanks for having us, guys. Man, I can't even believe you guys are here. We're excited. You're more important than the characters that are in this movie, bro. You know, and if you only have one flaw, there's only one flaw I have to say about you guys. Yeah. It's that you're from Cleveland. And I'm from Oakland. You know what I mean? Warriors, Cavs, that whole thing, man. That's the best thing we got going for us. What's the fact that you're from Cleveland? Oh, okay, cool. You guys are into this basketball thing? I know you're busy. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've been we're pretty intense in our loyalty to Cleveland sports teams. It's been a very painful life following Cleveland sports. Yeah. Up until recently, I mean, let me ask you. I mean, could LeBron have easily been one of the superheroes in this movie? Easily, right? Easily, right? Yes. Okay. He seems to be carrying them right now. So we'll see how this plays out. Yeah, well, Heather says that he probably has something in his blood.
Vibranium. I'm just going with vibranium in LeBron's blood. The NBA can't detect it every time it's time for them.
He looks like he's playing better than he's ever played.
I agree.
Yeah, he's so dimensional. This game's so dimensional right now. It's amazing. I don't know how he does it. Him and Brady, it's like, you know, whether it's the diet or what they're doing, but it's phenomenal.
I want to ask you guys, all these amazing actors, Chris Hemsworth, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, Scarlett Johansson, Chris Evans, Chadwick Boseman, a good friend of ours. Zoe's been here. Everybody on this list is Anthony Mackie. They've all been on this show at one point or another. People have made a big, deal about how much of the budget was that you got for a film like this. Can you break it down? How does this works behind the scene on the back end? How do you determine where funds are appropriated? Is it towards effects? Is it towards salary? Does the movie studio pay these things? How does that work?
Caskets all.
We just get, we give most of it to Downey. To Downey? Yeah. Is that what happens? So, how do you budget a film of this magnitude?
I mean, it does break down that way where the cast does get a big percentage of it. These movies have been incredibly successful. There's 18 of them, and typically as movies succeed, casts get more expensive. The VFX are incredibly expensive on a movie like this. Well into the hundreds of millions. So between those two, those are the largest categories that take most of the money. And then there's just the day-to-day running of a production that can be very expensive, especially with these two movies. We shot for a year straight from January to January with about 2 weeks in between. So You're spending on average, I don't know, 350, 400, 450, 400,000, 450,000 just a day, just to keep the production running. So you know, think of that, Tab.
Wow.
How embarrassing is it if you go over budget and then you have to ask the studio like, we need more money?
That's the irony is like no matter how much money you have, at some point you run out of money.
Right.
All right. So it's like it's pretty crazy.
So we gave you hundreds of millions, and you still need more.
How do you celebrate? I'm just curious. When we had, as we mentioned, we had Ryan Coogler here and the entire cast of Black Panther. When we saw them, they looked exhausted, like happy but exhausted. And how do you celebrate with the numbers, obviously, but then you get the call that we're going to do this movie? When do you get to say, like, high five, we did it, let's go to Bahamas and get naked? I don't know whether
maybe a year and a half from now. It really is like a sprint to the finish, these movies. I mean, we started them in 2016. There were 2 of them back-to-back, 2 of the most expensive movies ever made. Shot them back-to-back, had to prep them, you know, write them, edit them. We finished shooting in January, raced into the edit room to finish Infinity War, handed it off to Disney on April 7th, said, here's the movie. Got on a plane and then went to Mexico City and London and Edinburgh and Seoul, Korea and Tokyo and Shanghai and literally lapped the world and are just ending here. So we haven't even had a moment to process it, but that's why I think they all looked exhausted when they came in to see it, because these press tours are intense and they take you all over the world.
I'll tell you that we go to Cleveland this weekend. That's where we always end our press tours. And
Whatever.
It's game Saturday night.
On Monday morning, we start bright and early with our editor in the edit room working on the next Avenger movie. So
Wow.
we're ready to
Sleep. So when you come up with these storylines, because all these characters have, you know, their own storylines, and do you borrow from, Heather mentioned Ryan Coogler and Black Panther, for continuity of James Gunn with Guardians of the Galaxy, do you borrow for continuity from those movies previously shot, or how do you?
You have to. I mean, I think that's part of the process is that we're all handing story off to each other. But I think what the audience loves about these movies is that there's different authors for each film, and that, you know, our interpretation of Captain America is very different than Joss Whedon's interpretation of Captain America. Taika Waititi's interpretation of Thor is very different than Kenneth Branagh's. So I think the audience likes the evolution, and they like to be surprised and to see it go in different directions. If a movie exists, it's easy for us to watch it the same way you do and understand the storytelling and the narrative of it and how to carry that forward. If something's being shot concurrently, which Black Panther was, and Ryan was in Atlanta with us, we were across town from each other, so we were driving over there all the time to sit down with him because he's building out this incredible world, and just hearing about the characters that he's bringing into it and where he's going with it thematically and what the tone of it is. Those sorts of things are very important to us while we're working on the film, especially because Wakanda plays such a big part in our movie.
Ryan Coogler, man, as you know, as a young director, film writer, the whole nine, you know, you guys been in the business for a minute. What do you think of this guy?
He's amazing. Like, he is one of the nicest, greatest human beings you'll meet, and an incredibly talented director. I mean, just think about his age and what he's accomplished at his age. It's staggering. And that movie is perhaps the most groundbreaking film that we've seen in movies in decades.
You guys, by any chance, know where Ryan's from?
Oh yeah.
Fellas, I just want to put that out there.
We've heard.
You've heard, right? So you're shooting year round. If an actor is sick or something happens, how does that affect your schedule?
It gets a little crazy, but look, you know, and those things do happen. You know, the only people that can't get sick are Joe and I. So it's, you know, but yeah, we change things around. Everybody, look, even though this is a huge cast and these are among the biggest movie stars in the business, they all came to the table on this movie knowing that's what's special about this movie is the fact that they're all coming together. So everybody approached it in a very collaborative energy. You know, they're like, we know we gotta do things differently on this movie to make it work. And so people were very flexible. People were very giving of their time, very supportive of their other cast members and my brother and I. So it was a really communal effort to pull off a very difficult movie. Yeah.
You know, you don't hear a lot about director duos, so I'm wondering, Aunt Joe, how do you guys divide the work amongst you two? Like, what are the different roles you guys play?
We try not to divide it because, you know, we think that, like, you know, two minds are better than one, and we like to have both their brains on everything. And part of our process is just arguing out ideas. It's a little bit like a high school debate club, you know. they put us in a room, especially when we're working with the writers of all of these films for us, Christopher Marcus and Steve McFeely, and it's hilarious. I mean, it's just like everybody's arguing with each other about, what the best path through the story, what the best idea is for the story, which character should interact with which character, and we do this for months on end. So our process is really just trying to keep the two of us together all the time and keeping our brains on everything. Now, obviously, it doesn't always happen because these movies are so complicated. It's helpful that there are two of us and we can divide and conquer on some things, but for the most part, we try to stay together.
In music, a lot of times, if there's a duo or a group, like one person wants to go solo for like an album or something like that. Do you guys have thoughts about that? Like, yo, hey, I just want to do this one to myself.
A part of what was beneficial about our TV career is that we spent a lot of time. We would do the pilots together for the shows that we did. So we did Arrested Development, community show called Happy Endings, but we directed the episodes separately. That's a period where it's easier for us to not direct together because we've already established what the tone of the show is, what the look of the show is, what we cast to do. So it's easier for us to split up and cover more ground.
And we were also both producing the show at the same time, so we're still, we still had that connection to each episode and all that. Yeah.
Who was the big brother?
Guess.
Yeah, I already.
Spoiler.
As soon as you turned, I did that.
I like that. You with that devilish grin.
I got more kids, so I look older.
Yeah. Oh no, man, I wouldn't say that.
It's only a year difference.
Just a year difference. Okay. But I'm the younger brother. 2-year difference.
Oh yeah. Could you work with your brother?
Absolutely. Fucking not. No. Yeah, I love my brother, man. I love to work with him. He's and he's bossy, and I like that about. Is he bossy, bro?
We're not. No, I might be the boss.
You might be the bossy one. Oh no, my brother has a very strong personality, but he's a very creative guy. So I trust his instincts more than I trust my own.
That's cool. Yeah, we always get the reaction. Like either people look at us and go, "Oh man, I wish I could work with my brother, my sister," or they're like, "Oh man, I could never ever work with my brother."
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. DB, go ahead. Get your input on Martin Scorsese recently came out to say his thoughts about Rotten Tomatoes and the websites that they rate these movies before they even come out, and so a lot of people look at these sites where critics or whoever, or even just people who users who go on the site and they say, okay, we thought it was this, and maybe it's not good, or it is. Do you think that hurts a film? That people using that judgment in order to base what they want to go see it or not?
I mean, it's part of our culture now. Is that like everybody wants things like, diluted down to the simplest form. And because social media drives conversations, it's like, what does everybody think? Certainly, it can hurt movies. I mean, I think that it is dangerous. It's overly simplifying an approach to a movie, and I don't know, is a collective always right about judging content? So I do think people have to think for themselves and go see movies for themselves and make their own decisions. But it is and it's an aggregate score, so it's like, I don't know how can you judge? So what was Scorsese's? What did he say about it?
It was the whole tomato scale, like the rotten or is it fresh and things like that. So it's like people look at that like, oh well, if it's rotten, that must mean the movie sucks, but you didn't even go see it for yourself.
Right.
So it's kind of what you were saying, like make up your own mind rather than just let somebody tell you.
For sure.
I have an 8-year-old boy, and literally the first thing out of his mouth about a movie is always, what is its Rotten Tomato score? He just wants to he's obsessed with it.
Yeah. Character development. Who was the hardest to really develop, or what? And for this particular storyline?
Well, some of the characters. One of the things that excited us most about this character is this movie is that Thanos is the villain of the film. He drives the film. We really designed the whole movie around him in many ways. And with villains always get most interesting when the hero or the protagonist has a very personal relationship with them. That's what we loved about making Winter Soldiers. You had Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, who were best friends, who are now enemies. In this movie, we had 2 children of Thanos in Gamora and Nebula. two of the Guardians. So we really ran at that idea that they have a malignant like father-daughter relationship, and so especially with the relationship between Thanos and Gamora. Not to get into the story too much.
Don't do too much. Okay. I haven't seen it yet.
But that was a very difficult road for Zoe to play. She's such an amazing actress. She's a really brave actress, and we went to some very difficult places in that relationship. And I think it took a lot of sensitive work to get everybody there. But Josh and her are such amazing performers. They really went for it, and it's part of our favorite things in the movie. Yeah.
Okay. After watching this movie, it dawned on me how whether it's Thanos, whether it's Ultron, whoever the Killmonger, the villain may have an idea in their head that they may go about the wrong way, but in a way, there's still a little bit of sense to what their goal is. Right. Even if it's like some evil master plan, Thanos does make a point of, I'm not going to say what it is, but when you see the movie, you'll see, like, in a way, he's kind of right. How do you come up with those plans and execute it to where somebody might see the sense in it, but still not completely agree with it?
Well, so typically you look for an idea that you understand, and that, like I said, there's four of us in a room arguing that we all understand. We sit there and go, that's a noble idea. Typically where villains go wrong is that it involves killing people, and it involves destruction and mayhem as a way to achieve their means rather than some sort of, spiritual approach or, healing approach to the concept. So, he does want to bring balance to the universe. That's a noble cause. It's but murdering a large portion of it is the really shitty part.
But the weird thing about Thanos is I think he thinks of himself as a servant. He's like it's not about ego for him. He's literally going to sacrifice to bring balance to the universe, to make the universe a better place, and he's willing to sacrifice everything he is to do that. And again, he doesn't. You don't see him kill. He only kills in furtherance of that goal. He's very disciplined and focused to what he wants. There is something ennobling about that, Or
he views himself as like a holy warrior.
Yeah.
A holy warrior. All right, I gotta go to these phone lines, man. Anthony and Joe Russo are here, ladies and gentlemen. This is big. They're the directors of Avengers Infinity War. When you call up, there are a lot of people who have yet to see the movie. Okay? Believe it or not. So don't give away too much when you call and ask these questions.
Yeah, no spoilers.
No spoilers. Okay, we got James from Chicago on the line. James, what up?
Hey, good morning, Sway TV.
Good morning.
I just want to say I really enjoyed that movie. I was hurt. I was really emotional at the end of that movie. I almost cried. But also, I read something yesterday that I think the Russos wrote that said that the next movie doesn't do what we think it does. That we accept what happened and move on, the better it'll be. Is that true?
The next movie doesn't do what we think it does.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about it movie, but
it's so specific to the ending and what he's talking about.
We will say this, that obviously Thanos is a very formidable villain, and to beat Thanos it will come at a very high cost. We're committed to stakes. We believe in stakes. It's really, we like to shake up the Marvel Universe. We had a big game changer at the end of Winter Soldier. We had a big game changer at the end of Civil War, a big game changer at the end of Infinity War, and obviously it'll be a big game changer at the end of Avengers 4.
You gotta see the movie, so don't even talk about what did you just say to us? What does that mean? What are my childhood heroes? All right, man. I am Black Panther. Just want to let you know that, bro. All right, John in Connecticut, go ahead.
Yo, what's going on, Sway? What's going on, everybody?
What's happening?
Not much. Hey, first and foremost, love the show. Love you guys. I've been a citizen for years. Now, as far as these Russo brothers that I've come to love as my own brothers.
Thank you. That's very sweet.
I am a huge Marvel guy. Met Stan Lee with my son a few years back. I've been into this forever, and what you guys have been able to do is something I've been waiting for since I was a kid. And my real question I got to you guys is, because I've seen the movie 3 times. Thanos, my favorite villain of all time in the comics. You guys killed it on the silver screen. Josh Brolin's amazing. Everybody's amazing. But my question is, how did you guys come to, especially with the lack of being able
did you guys come to the decision to like give the certain characters like their screen time versus the other screen time? Like how did you guys do it? Like,
that's a good question.
You guys literally made a master.
Oh, thank you, man. It's very, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah, we basically, for Joe and I, we love these characters. We have a huge history with them, like you do. That goes back to our childhood, and we've loved everything that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done since the very first Iron Man. So we are all in on these characters, and we just basically look at everything that guides us as story. And it's like, when we sat down to figure out what Infinity War was, we sat in a room like this and we put every picture on the wall of every single character that ever appeared in the MCU. And that was our starting point.
Wow.
And it was a little overwhelming for a while because there are so many possibilities. There's so many different places you can go. But, it's, again, like Joe was talking before, we just sit in a room with Marcus McFeely and we just start to tell each other stories. We just start to grab certain characters, and pretty soon a thread starts to develop. And then once that thread develops, we just start to build things around that thread. And what we ran at in this movie is like, what are the richest character moments? Because at first, like, these movies are big spectacles. They're, people love them for the spectacle. But I think the favorite thing that audiences love about these movies is the character moments. And I think that's what's true for Joe and I as well. So really, what we did is we ran at the most rich character relationships and most rich character conflict we could figure out. And that was like mentioning before, that was Thanos Gamora was very rich. Thor was an interesting place at the beginning of this movie in the sense that at the end of Ragnarok, and I can talk about that movie because it's been out for so long, but it's he had basically lost his planet. It's like Thor was in a place where he was losing everything. And who is he when he after everything is gone? It's a very interesting place to pick up a story for a character. So we would run at these sort of the most complex, rich character tensions that we had in the story. That's basically what we found our way through.
Well, that's amazing, and maybe consider this when you shoot your next movie, and which comes out the day after my birthday next year.
Oh wow.
Okay, great. Okay. Then when you talk about the MCU, Marvel's Comics universe, that Heather B and I are a part of the MCU because we were featured in the Luke Cage series.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So Sway, Heather B, you writing that script.
We gotta put your picture on the wall.
I'm just saying, put our picture on the wall, baby.
We're Universe Media.
Okay, season 2 is coming. I can't reveal anything. You know how they are. You lose your life.
Oh, that's right. The snipers are watching us.
Oh my gosh, they are. And then secondly, man, what does it feel like? I mean, just think of your childhood till now, just to be, part of the biggest, highest grossing film in history, man.
Wow.
It's a crazy journey, and I don't know if it'll ever sink in. It's weird because you can kind of, separate yourself from your, what's happening sometimes. And the good news is we haven't had any time to just step back and absorb it. We've been relentlessly out there promoting the movie. So maybe at some point when we get a break after Avengers 4, we'll sit back and look at it. But
that road, our very first movie that was ever came out commercially was called Welcome to Collinwood, neighborhood in Cleveland.
Yes. Oh.
And it was that movie. I think we made that movie for maybe $7 million or so, and that movie made about $300,000 in U.S. box office. So it's like knowing that that's where we started. It's been a long road.
Well, congratulations, man, Anthony and Joel, man. Hey, congratulations, man. Please come back anytime.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
You guys are awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. Thank you, man.
Thanks, everybody.
You're very welcome. I'm seeing it this weekend, so. All right, we got Celebrity Wire up next way in the Morning Shade 4-5.
Let's make sure the drums are smacking.
Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst. Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst time.
Superhumans of Europe, of course, tries to plead with the Atlanteans, telling them that it wasn't their intention, this was a mistake. And of course, we see that Norman Osborn is really kind of panicking here and really kind of sputtering and says that he didn't do it, that he swears it wasn't his fault. So as the Civil War event begins to wind down to a close, we pick up with Civil War Frontline issue number 9. And what we see here is that Sally Floyd is being granted an interview by Captain America. And this is not something that we've seen yet. Since the very beginning of Civil War, since Captain America was able to overpower the SHIELD forces led by Maria Hill and go underground, we have not seen an instance where Captain America has really kind of publicly spoken out about his stance regarding the Civil War registration or his position as the leader of the underground movement. And what we see here is that as the interview kind of progresses, that Sally Floyd is very disheartened by what she's hearing, because what she's hearing is really kind of the opposite of what you would expect to hear from Captain America. And what I would like you guys to do is pay very close attention to the things that he is saying, because these will become particularly important as we get to the end of Civil War and the final confrontation between the forces of Captain America and the forces of Tony Stark. And so what we see here is that Sally Floyd begins by asking him what it is that he's trying to convey, what it is that he's trying to say, and what it was that happened that caused him to turn against S.H.I.E.L.D. We see that Captain America replies by saying that he didn't turn against S.H.I.E.L.D., that he asked for time to review this policy, to review the Superhuman Registration Act before it went into implementation, but that they didn't give him time to, that cooler heads really kind of needed to prevail here, that people really kind of needed to take some time to really kind of calm down after the events of Stamford, Connecticut, and not rush into a kind of foolhardy move. And he really kind of makes the argument that this is no longer the country that he vowed to defend, that the United States is kind of becoming this split down the middle territory between red and blue, and that it's really kind of more of the divided states of America instead of the United States of America. And Sally Floyd really kind of replies to this by saying that she had always thought the United States has kind of been a split of red and blue. There were always people who had held these absolute political allegiances, and that was one of the things that really kind of made the United States an interesting talking point among other people across the world. And that if some kind of situation arose whereby Captain America deviated from his normal standard of being duty-bound, his normal standard of defending the rule of law, that it could potentially result in a civil war, especially if other individuals followed his lead. And Captain America replies by saying that war is anything but civil, and that it's the last resort of the desperate, and that's where we are right now. He talks about how for 60 years he had kind of been looked to by the federal government to be the defender of freedom. And this is really kind of interesting here, because Captain America is really kind of presenting himself as the last bastion of freedom in the United States at the moment, that he's really kind of the last righteous individual, and that everybody else is really kind of leading the way towards this World War II Nazi Germany kind of society. And he says that he sees what happens when an insane idea gets out of hand. He talks about the kind of things that he saw during World War II and how Adolf Hitler was able to assuage the minds of individuals towards an insane cause, and he was able to somehow rally all these individuals towards persecuting millions of individuals under a single ideology. And then we see that it's just one bad idea. He really says that just one bad idea can really cause things to spiral down into this horrible place that nobody had really envisioned anybody, that the nation itself actually going into. Sally Floyd is really kind of not necessarily buying this. She tells Captain America that she really kind of wants to be spared these comparisons between Nazi Germany, and that she's really not buying into this kind of propaganda that he's spilling. She says that if he recalls correctly, that a lot of the German soldiers who fought during World War II were simply just soldiers following orders, and that the patriots, they were in effect patriots fighting for the wrong cause. And Captain America replies that's exactly his point, and he asks what it is that Miss Floyd is really kind of trying to establish. He asks Sally Floyd what it is that she's really kind of trying to say, and what she says is that war, the winner of war, is not necessarily anyone in particular. That war is not about who's right. that war is about who's left, who it is that survives, and the survivors are the ones that really kind of define what the history is going to be. Captain America replies that she's being a little simplistic, but she says that she really thought there was going to be some kind of a story here. She really thought that maybe there was going to be this idea of Captain America having some sort of philosophical belief or something more, I guess, concrete than simply just presenting himself as this sort of freedom-based messiah with this perspective that everybody except for him is wrong. And what we see is that Sally Floyd initially had been given 15 minutes by Captain America, but she only chose to take 5 and decides to leave to head to her date with Danny. What we see now is we kind of switch over to Ben Urich and Peter Parker, and the two of them are really kind of investigating the claims that had been passed on to Danny or passed on to Ben Urich by Danny, that Tony Stark may very well have had a hand and is really kind of the moving force behind the Civil War movement, that he is really kind of doing this for the purpose of financial gain. Peter Parker and Ben Urich have really kind of installed a worm of some kind onto the accounting firm's computers of Tony Stark and are investigating the financial gains that he's made over the years, or kind of investigating the money that he's pulled in as a result of the actions that have started since the beginning of Civil War. And what we see here is that Peter Parker is pointing out the idea of money that is really kind of spiked up, that while Tony Stark has several subsidiaries, that none of these subsidiaries are generating money out of the blue. The company has somehow come into a lot of money, that the money that the company has made has really kind of, skyrocketed about 2 days before Civil War, but they don't really know where it's coming from. There's really no trail here. There's no finger they can point to and say, this money is coming from somewhere else. Again, Ben Urich is a little hesitant to believe that Tony Stark is really kind of manipulating the entire Civil War event for the purposes of gaining money, and goes as far as to say this to Peter Parker, to say that he doesn't think that Tony Stark would manipulate the lives of individuals for personal financial gain. And Peter Parker says that he used to believe this until Tony Stark started messing with his life. From here, we transition over to the Avengers Tower, and what we see is that Reed Richards and Radioactive Man are investigating the nanobots in the bloodstream of Norman Osborn, and they see that these nanobots have been reprogrammed, that something is entirely different. The question is raised by Radioactive Man if it's possible that his own body chemistry, that Norman Osborn's own body chemistry had altered the programming of the nanobots that were put inside his body, and Reed Richards says, no, this isn't the case, that somebody has actually given him something to either suppress these nanobots or to reprogram these nanobots, but that it had to have been somebody from within. And Reed Richards tells Radioactive Man that he needs to investigate what's going on here. He needs to look into what's happening, because Miss Marvel arrives and informs them that they've picked up movement off the Atlantic coast from Virginia down to Florida, and it appears as though the Atlanteans are really, making preparations to wage war against the United States, although nothing's really happened yet. And what we see is that with Radioactive Man having been tasked by Reed Richards to investigate this issue of the nanoprobes, that no one is above investigation, that Radioactive Man is to investigate everybody, which includes Tony Stark, Reed Richards, Hank Pym, anybody who could have had access to these nanoprobes. What we also see is that Tony Stark pulls Reed Richards aside and asks to speak with him privately. And Reed Richards is, of course, a little hesitant due to the fact that there's so much going on at the moment, but of course he grants Tony Stark the time to speak. Reed Richards really kind of talks about how what's going on here, the attack of the Green Goblin on the Atlanteans, has really come at such a terrible time, because the attack on the Atlanteans could be considered by the Atlanteans an act of war, and if they choose to go to war with the United States at such a fractured point when the superhero community is so divided, that it could lead to a total disaster and could very well result in the total destruction of the United States, as there would really be no superheroes who could band together and to fight off the Atlanteans. But then we see that Reed Richards, of course, talks to Tony Stark and tells him that he's considering going and seeing Namor, the Submariner, personally, to really kind of investigate what it was that was going on. And then, of course, we see Tony Stark telling Reed Richards that he knows who the traitor is, and that he's known since the beginning. From here, we switch to the Raft, which of course is the prison where individuals with superpowers are being housed. And we see that, of course, Robbie Baldwin is being held back in captivity again. From here, we see that there appears to be some kind of prison break that is being organized by Razor Fist and other individuals, and that the prison break involves using Robbie Baldwin as a human shield. What we see is that while some of the taunting is taking place, while some of the individuals are really giving Robbie Baldwin a hard time, that Razor Fist physically grabs Robbie Baldwin and appears to hold him hostage. What we also see is that Diamond Head has grabbed the two guards that were escorting Robbie Baldwin as Razor Fist was holding him hostage as a means of a diversion, and kills both of the guards. We then see that Crimson Dynamo, Justine Hammer, is able to infiltrate the offices of the guards that are monitoring this situation, incapacitate the both of them, and orchestrate the release of all the prisoners within the Raft. We then see that the prison break commences the exact way that you think it would, where the prisoners are sort of running around and everybody's acting kind of in a crazy and pandemonium way, but ultimately, as Razor Fist is taking Robbie Baldwin, that he injures him. And Robbie Baldwin complains, of course, that Razor Fist had injured him, and Razor Fist asks, "Do you think that I care?" And Robbie Baldwin says no, that he likes it. And then we see a sudden explosion within the Raft, and from there, everybody who was involved in the riot is completely incapacitated. Shield guards arrive on the scene and are able to apprehend Justine Hammer as well as the other individuals who are now unconscious, and we see that Robbie Baldwin is sitting within his cell and says he's been thinking a lot about the Registration Act, and that he's come to a decision and that he wants to know where to sign. So as we continue on with our discussions on the Civil War tie-ins, we of course pick up with Wolverine with Volume 3, Issue number 46. And of course in Issue number 45, we had talked about how Nitro had been handed over to Namor the Submariner and the Atlanteans in order for them to exact their retribution against him for the death of Namorita. But what Namor the Submariner has also done is given Wolverine the information that he was looking for. He of course tells Wolverine that Damage Control Incorporated were the ones that had given Nitro the mutant growth hormone that was used to allow him to inflict so much damage in Stamford, Connecticut. And Wolverine's also informed that the CEO of the company is a man named Walter Delkin. And so what Wolverine does is he goes to the headquarters of Damage Control Incorporated and asks to see Walter. Now Wolverine is taken to I guess the main office of the building, but he's not actually meeting with Walter Delkin in this instance. Instead, he meets with a woman named Anne-Marie Hogue. And Anne-Marie says that she's the president of the company. And what this means is that Damage Control Incorporated, or the subsidiary of Damage Control Incorporated in which she's in charge of, is the company she has control of. But because Walter Delkin owns that company along with a multitude of others, Walter Delkin is the CEO, and so again, he is the top authority here. Anne-Marie tells Wolverine that he has about 5 minutes to explain why it is that he's here, and what Wolverine does is he shows her the mutant growth hormone that he had taken from Nitro. And what Wolverine tells Anne-Marie is that, of course, he had taken this from Nitro, which is, I guess, a drug of sorts that gives normal humans abilities and enhances the abilities of those that already have them. And he says that this was given to Nitro in order for Nitro to, I guess, use his power to cause a massive amount of damage and to start the entire situation that led to the Superhuman Registration Act in the first place. But what this seems interesting here, what makes this kind of a surprise, is that Anne-Marie seems as though she didn't know this. It seems as though she had no idea this was actually taking place. And in fact, she goes as far as to explain to Wolverine that the recession had hit her company very hard. And so Walter Delkin and his investors had bought the controlling stake of her company. And so while she is the president of the company, she's more or less a figurehead here. And that all the power rests in the hands of Walter Delkin. And that Walter Delkin had eventually made his way into the position of CEO. But before she's able to explain too much further, we see that Walter Delkin joins both her and Wolverine. And what Walter Delkin tells tells her is to stop talking and that Wolverine needs to get out of here. But again, Wolverine refuses to leave. Wolverine doesn't go. Of course, his intention here is to perhaps maybe exact some kind of revenge on Walter Delkin. Now, what Walter Delkin tells Wolverine is that S.H.I.E.L.D.'s response time for a 911 call is 3 minutes, and that he had called 3.5 minutes ago. And so again, Wolverine talks about how the idea here is to initially leave, but it seems as though he has an ulterior motive here. Maybe there's some kind of a plan that he had that we're not entirely aware of. But what we learn is that Wolverine, as he was going through the company, or I guess going through the building, had installed some kind of a data transmitter, a device that would allow him to capture various forms of information. And what we learn as he transitions to Forge's workshop is that this data transmitter was designed to capture information from Damage Control Incorporated, and that the information that was given to, or I guess that was attained on this data miner, tells us more or less what's been going on as far as Damage Control Incorporated's involvement with the Superhuman, I guess, Registration Act. And what we learn here is that Damage Control Incorporated had been given a contract by the federal government for the purpose of cleaning up after superheroes and villains whenever it was that they engaged in conflicts. But from the time that Damage Control Incorporated had first been given their contract, they had basically been instigating a set of situations whereby superheroes and villains would engage in confrontation when they normally wouldn't. And so for Damage Control Incorporated, the passage of the Superhuman Registration Act was a gold mine. It meant that they would be the ones who would be given the contract for cleaning up after superheroes. They would be the ones given the contract for making sure that superheroes are trained, for making sure that superheroes are prepared for the role that they will have to undertake as agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And so this would be a very lucrative situation. And so what Forge more or less tells Wolverine, and what Wolverine tells us, is that this is all about money. This is all about Damage Control Incorporated using their contract to make as much money as they possibly can. And Wolverine's very angry about this. Wolverine's very upset because what he tells us is that he's seen this kind of thing before. He's seen that whenever there's any kind of a conflict, there's always going to be people who are going to try to profit off of that conflict. And this is yet another instance. But again, when he tells Forge what it is that he wants to do, Forge says that this is not as simple as just going after one man. That if Walter Delkin is killed, that something's going to happen whereby another person will simply just take his place. And Wolverine says he's already thought about this. And he says that just like anything else, just like going after some kind of artificial program or artificial entity, in the end, the only thing you can do is simply just chop it down to pieces to the point that it just can't reconstitute itself. And this is when we see Wolverine going through these actions, going through this plan. What Wolverine initially does here is he goes to the storage warehouse for a lot of the equipment that Damage Control Incorporated has, and he destroys the equipment. What he also does is he travels to a bank in Grand Cayman, and what he does with this bank is he effectively forces them to surrender their, I guess, assets in terms of what Damage Control Incorporated is holding overseas. Again, this may very well be an instance of Damage Control Incorporated using tax shelters in order to avoid taxation. But again, the head of the bank tells Wolverine that this is not a very simple thing. That even if Wolverine is able to take away the funds that Damage Control Incorporated has, that those funds are insured. And so in the end, it's not going to make any difference. That the money is going to be given back to Damage Control Incorporated, and they're going to continue about their business. But what we see is that once Wolverine is successfully able to seize the money that Damage Control Incorporated has in Grand Cayman, then he goes after their I guess, West Haven Mutual Fund. He goes after the insurance company that is insuring the money that Damage Control Incorporated has set aside. Now from here, we switch back to the headquarters of Damage Control Incorporated with Walter Delkin. And Walter Delkin is, of course, talking to one of his aides, and his aide is saying that, again, another one of their assets has been attacked. Another one of their assets is liquidating all of the holdings of Damage Control Incorporated stock, which is, in effect, driving down the value of the company, which of course will result in the existing investors pulling out, and most likely the company resulting in having to go bankrupt. But of course, what we see Walter Delkin doing is organizing a situation, organizing a set of circumstances whereby they can force whoever this individual is that is sabotaging their assets into a trap. And of course, again, at this time, they don't know that it's Wolverine. Now from here, what we learn is that Walter Delkin, by a mishmash of using, I guess, public relations as well as finance, more or less goes public and saying that they have purchased a building for a new headquarters. And this, as we learn, is actually a trap that's been set up by Walter Delkin. Of course, Wolverine buys into the bait, and when he arrives at the building, he's immediately ambushed by several individuals using Stark Tech that are, I guess, attempting to eliminate Wolverine. But what we also learn with this story is that in addition to the armor and technology that they also have weapons on their arms that are composed of adamantium, which is, of course, as Wolverine explains it to us, the only thing that can cut through adamantium, similar to how a diamond can only cut another diamond. And so as Wolverine is going against these foes, one of the individuals uses the blade on the top of his hand to begin the process of severing Wolverine's head off, which, of course, is where this particular comic comes to an end. Now, from here, we pick up with Wolverine Volume 3, issue number 47. And with issue number 47, of course, we pick up directly where we left off with issue number 46, which is, of course, the conflict between Wolverine and these henchmen. And Wolverine, as he is going through this, seems to have been defeated. It seems as though, as these individuals are telling us, that his head is hanging on by a thread, and so Wolverine is no longer a threat to them. Of course, they begin celebrating, and they begin, relishing in the fact that they have presumably killed Wolverine, when they turn to the third member of their team who had apparently been killed by Wolverine. Now, of course, as they try to tell him to hang in there, as they try to tell him to keep himself, keep himself alive, it appears as though he's trying to tell them something. Initially, they can't make out what it is, but once they get close enough to hear what it is that he's saying, someone behind them pipes up and says that this individual that was laying unconscious was saying, "Watch out behind you." And at this point, we learn that Wolverine is now joined with Janice, as well as another one of the Atlanteans. And from here, we see, of course, that Janice, alongside this blonde Atlantean, are able to fight with Wolverine in order to take out these other henchmen, in order to take out these other individuals. Now, initially, Wolverine, once he heals himself, jumps back into the fray again, but almost immediately after he jumps into the conflict, we see that the group is joined by Robert Reynolds, by the Sentry, who, of course, is fighting on the side of Iron Man here. And the Sentry tells Wolverine to stand down. He tells Wolverine that he doesn't need to engage in any action here. Of course, Wolverine says that, again, he's on a much larger crusade than anything that is as trivial as revenge, but for the most part, Robert Reynolds is again carrying out the role of S.H.I.E.L.D. And so Robert Reynolds and Wolverine get into a hand-to-hand conflict. Now, this is a very interesting situation here, because what we have is a being as powerful as Robert Reynolds, who is in effect able to do almost anything the Incredible Hulk is able to do, who's going toe-to-toe with Wolverine, who can heal from pretty much anything. And so the question becomes, what would happen? Who would come out on top? Now, of course, as the story continues and as this comic continues, we inevitably see that Wolverine is, taken over by Robert Reynolds and is defeated. And in the end, he's taken captive by S.H.I.E.L.D. and taken to the main S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, where he's confronted by Maria Hill. Now, Maria Hill tells Wolverine that, again, that he's made a mistake here, that he's fighting on the wrong side, that the right side here is to fight on the side of Iron Man, and that in the end, the idea here of him going after Walter Delkin is a stopgap measure, that there's no real effort here, there's nothing to really be gained here, that even if Walter Delkin was killed, that Damage Control Incorporated would continue to go on, and that S.H.I.E.L.D. would be the ones to make sure that that happens. In addition, we also see her, maybe egging on Wolverine a little bit, almost mocking him, telling him that, again, there's nowhere for him to go, that the entire situation here has been set up in such a way to where he is at the behest of S.H.I.E.L.D. But Wolverine confronts this. Wolverine says that he's going to slice through the shackles that have been placed on his arms. He's in turn going to take Maria Hill's sidearm, and that he's going to escape. And Maria Hill says that this is not going to happen. And the reason is because the collar that he has around his neck keeps him from being able to use his powers. And Wolverine responds by telling her that this is the mistake that everybody makes. And when she asks him what it is, he says the mistake is assuming that his claws are a superpower. At this point, Wolverine's claws break loose out of the shackles, and he's able to escape his binds, and then takes Maria Hill hostage, as well as takes her gun. And so what he does is simply blow a hole in one of the windows and then jump out. And so from here, we of course see that as Wolverine is making his way to the bottom, that he is landing in New York City proper. At this point, we transition back to Damage Control Incorporated to Anne Marie, as well as Walter Delkin. And it seems as though Anne-Marie is confronting Walter Delkin and trying to find a way to force him out, to oust him as the CEO. Of course, she's citing the fact that the company's hemorrhaging money, and that under the leadership of Walter Delkin, the company appears to be faring for the worst, to the point that it's almost at the verge of bankruptcy. But of course, Walter Delkin says that he's not going to step down, that the only way that he would step down is over his cold dead body, which of course we see Wolverine willing to oblige when he makes himself known to everybody in the room. Now at this point, Wolverine and Walter Delkin get into this kind of discussion back and forth where Walter Delkin says that if Wolverine's intention is to kill him, then he better do it quickly. And Wolverine of course says that he has every reason to kill Walter Delkin, that of course Walter Delkin's actions resulted in Nitro destroying a large portion of Stamford, Connecticut, which of course led to the implementation or the introduction of the Superhuman Registration Act. But before either of them actually engage in a conflict, Walter Delkin consumes some of the mutant growth hormones and gives himself abilities. And with these abilities, he begins engaging in hand-to-hand combat with Wolverine. Now, initially, we don't really know what powers it is that he gets. We don't know exactly what kind of abilities he gains, but it seems that for the most part, due to his ability to go toe-to-toe physically with Wolverine, that he gains some measure of enhanced strength, some kind of super strength. But again, on the streets of New York City, Walter Delkin and Wolverine begin going against one another. They begin fighting one another and engaging in hand-to-hand combat. And the fight seems quite brutal, and it seems quite even. We, of course, see that Wolverine is simply just pummeling Walter Delkin, but Walter Delkin is also getting hits in as well. But again, as the conflict continues, Wolverine begins to gain the upper hand. And when he begins to gain the upper hand, he has Walter Delkin in a position whereby he's able to kill him. But what we learn is that Wolverine has actually, almost the entire time, been talking to Miriam, who, of course, is the mother of one of the children who had been killed in Stamford, Connecticut, and the person who had been on the side, or I guess who had spat in the face of Tony Stark earlier in the Civil War event. And so we ultimately see that Wolverine kills Walter Delkin. And when he does, he, of course, talking to Miriam, says that he doesn't really regret this one thing. That while he regrets a lot of the mistakes that he's made, while he regrets a lot of the things that he's done, this is one thing that he believes he's done right, which of course brings an end to the Wolverine portion of the Civil War event. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know. And I will catch you guys later. Peace. So as we pick up with Civil War Part 6, what we're going to find is this build-up, this lead-up to the finale of the Civil War event. Of course, we'll see that as this comic comes to a close, that we'll see that we're led to the very beginnings of this major confrontation between Captain America's side and Iron Man's side. But what we're also going to get is this explanation, a little bit of information in terms of how it was that this whole Civil War Superhuman Registration Act even started. That Congress didn't simply just arbitrarily say we should pass this bill, that there was a catalyst to passing this bill. There was someone who came along and said this bill should be passed or should be introduced to Congress so that it can pass. But what we see as we start this story is that we're at a SHIELD base in Arizona. And at this SHIELD base, we of course pick up with Hank Pym and Maria Hill. And what Hank Pym and Maria Hill are doing is analyzing these engineered superheroes, making sure that they're functioning the way that they were designed to do, to ensure that no further incidents like what happened with Thor take place. And what Hank Pym tells us here is that the superheroes, actions or the view of the superheroes has to be restored within the eyes of humanity, that people need to begin trusting superheroes again. And so having these superheroes, the ones who have been engineered, and to have them have fake identities to make them seem as though they're normal people will go towards allowing humanity to have its faith restored in superheroes. And that again, these are all going to be part of the big push. They're all going to be part of the 50-state initiative. And so again, with this story, this seems a little underhanded with regards to the actions of Hank Pym. Hank Pym and Maria Hill, of course, are basically telling us that they're going to trick humanity into believing that these engineered superheroes are actual people, and they're simply not going to tell humanity the truth. Now, whether or not this is something that will backfire is something we don't know at the moment, and again, it may never be explained to us. But as we continue with this story, we of course see that Hank Pym is called away by one of the SHIELD agents when he's informed that there's a problem with one of the superheroes that has been engineered. So of course we see that Hank Pym leaves Maria Hill to continue examining the superheroes that are currently functioning correctly. At this point, we transition to the Baxter Building with Reed Richards as he's continuing his work, his reprogramming on the cyborg version of Thor. And what Reed Richards is doing is he's conversing directly with Tony Stark. Now, of course, Tony Stark is currently outside of the Baxter Building, and they're just using a comm system in order to talk to one another. But of course, Tony Stark asks Reed Richards how the reprogramming is coming along. And Reed Richards says that they've been in surgery for quite some time. They've been working on this for quite some time. That, of course, that the reprogramming should keep this cyborg version of Thor from killing anybody else, but that the actions of this cyborg version of Thor in killing Bill Foster is, of course, something they're concerned about. But what he also does is he asks Tony Stark how everything's coming along on the street level in terms of the crime that's supposedly supposed to be going down. And what Tony Stark says is that the probability map that had been created by Reed Richards seems to be accurate, that crime statistics are at an all-time low, and that everything seems to be going in a much better direction. He also asked Reed Richards about his meeting with the president, and Reed Richards says that he specifically told the president he would only become part of the actual 50-state initiative when it launched if Johnny Storm and Susan Storm were being kept from any kind of prosecution. And of course, when Tony Stark asked Reed Richards what the president's response was, Reed Richards says the president gave him 12 immunities, which he can use for any individual. And of course, we know that 2 of those will most likely go to Johnny Storm and to Susan Storm. But as we continue with this story, we pick up again inside of the Baxter Building, but in a different part of the building. And what we learn here is that we're currently following the actions of Frank Castle. And Frank Castle is infiltrating the Baxter Building, but the way that he's doing it is very intriguing. What Frank Castle tells us is that the security system of the Baxter Building was designed by Reed Richards in such a way to where it would basically function in the same capacity as the immune system, in the sense that whenever the blue baubles or these blue spheres would determine, or I guess detect something that's not supposed to be there, they would immediately attack. And so the suit that Frank Castle is currently wearing is something he had stolen from Tony Stark, which allows him to move through the security system without actually being detected. And so from here, we pick up with both Captain America and Frank Castle as the 2 of them are communicating back and forth. And Captain America says that, or I guess informs us that the whole reason for Frank Castle being here is that he's going to gain some information on prison complex number 42, which is of course the complex where the majority of superheroes and supervillains who are anti-registration are being housed in the negative zone. And Captain America wants the specifics. He wants the specifications on this prison complex. He wants to know how big it is. He wants to know how much room they have to move around, how it's accessed, all the information that Frank Castle can possibly get, which of course Frank Castle is successful in being able to get for Captain America. And so from here we transition to Atlantis with Susan Storm meeting with Namor the Submariner. And what she's doing here, or at least as is explained to us, is she's looking to gain the forces of Namor the Submariner for the team of Captain America. But Namor the Submariner is initially, I guess, a little arrogant here, but is also reluctant to assist Susan Storm here. And the reason why is because he feels insulted. He feels that the idea of Captain America sending an emissary rather than Captain America coming here himself is an insult, in the sense that if Captain America is going to ask for aid from the direct ruler of Atlantis, then Captain America himself, as the leader of the Secret Avengers, should be the one to be here and ask for that aid. But what he also tells Susan Storm is that he believes Susan Storm has an affection for him, that he's noticed for quite some time that she'd been looking at him in such a way to where it appeared as though she had an interest. Of course, Susan Storm says no, but Namor the Submariner says he can detect the vibrations of her beating heart in the water, and that her heart is beating faster than it should. Now, whether or not this is because she genuinely does have an interest in Namor the Submariner, or because he's simply just attributing her erratic heartbeat due to her nervousness as being a romantic interest in Namor the Submariner, is not something that's explicitly explained to us. But I would go as far as to say that given the relationship between Susan Storm and Reed Richards, as tenuous as it is at the moment, that it may very well be that she does or did have an interest in Namor the Submariner that she had never acted on, and of course doesn't intend to act on at this point in time. From here, we pick up with Captain America and the Secret Avengers once more. And of course, we see that Captain America tells us that Name of the Submariner had turned down the offer of Captain America to extend aid to their forces. And so it seems as though, for the most part, the forces of Tony Stark and Reed Richards and S.H.I.E.L.D. vastly outnumber the forces of Captain America's team. But what we also see here is that Captain America is informing, or I guess speaking with the Secret Avengers, with Falcon and others, and telling them that Frank Castle was able to gain information about Prison 42. He was able to get them the schematics for the building, and that what they're going to be basically doing is launching a campaign to free all of the captured superheroes and supervillains within the complex. What he tells us is that the initiative is going to begin moving in such a direction that it's going to launch basically in a very short amount of time, and so their window is constantly getting smaller and smaller for when they can actually jump into this opportunity of freeing all these captured superheroes and supervillains. But what we also see is that they only have a couple of the codes regarding how to access the prison system on Rikers Island, because again, at the moment, the only method for access to the Prison 42 complex is at Rikers Island. But part of the 50-state initiative includes having access to the negative zone prison from one major prison system in all 50 states. And of course, Captain America and his team are trying to keep this from happening. And so as we continue with the story, we of course see one of the interesting concepts when we see that Diamondback brings in a couple of supervillains. And what these supervillains tell Captain America is that the supervillain community has just as much, if not more, to fear from what's going on with this 50-state initiative than the superheroes do. The superheroes could choose to register. They could simply just make themselves a part of S.H.I.E.L.D., but the supervillains will most likely not have this same opportunity. But before either of these supervillains are able to actually join Captain America, they're immediately shot to death by Frank Castle with no questions asked. And so what Captain America does is he immediately attacks Frank Castle. And Frank Castle says that they were bad guys, that they were killers and they were thieves, and that again, his purpose, his goal is to eliminate all villains anywhere that he finds them, regardless of what their motives are. And so as Captain America continues pummeling Frank Castle, he tells Frank Castle to fight back, but Frank Castle says that he won't fight against Captain America. And so it's at this point that Captain America relinquishes his fighting against Frank Castle and simply tells somebody to take Frank Castle away, to get Frank Castle out of here. We see that, of course, that Spider-Man explains that the whole reason why Frank Castle wouldn't go or wouldn't fight Captain America is because Frank Castle believed that maybe he had enrolled or he had become part of the Vietnam War to basically walk the same path as Captain America did, to make himself equal to Captain America. And of course, Captain America says no. He says this is wrong, and he says that Frank Castle is simply just an insane human being. And so at this point, we transition to Stamford, Connecticut. And this is when we learn why it was that the entire Superhuman Registration Act had been initiated in the first place. We see that Reed Richards and Tony Stark are meeting with Miriam, and I guess one of the mothers of the children who was killed during Stamford, Connecticut. And what Miriam tells us here is that it was her idea to launch, I guess, the Superhuman Registration Act, to get Tony Stark to launch the 50-state initiative, that she's basically the one who was behind all of this, that she was the mastermind. She was the reason why the bill went before Congress. She's the reason why Tony Stark, Reed Richards, and Hank Pym had sided with the bill. And so what this does is give us some very important insight into just how deep this whole Superhuman Registration Act goes. And from here we transition to the North Pole, to Doctor Strange's sanctuary. And Doctor Strange is visited by the Watcher. And the Watcher asks Doctor Strange how long he's been here, how long it's been since he has eaten. And Doctor Strange says basically since the beginning of the Civil War that he really hasn't had anything to eat, and he's only drank a little bit of water. And the whole reason why he's done this is because the idea is that hopefully his fasting will allow the Civil War to come to an end with as little bloodshed as possible. But what Doctor Strange also tells us here is a very important thing. He tells us that there's no right or wrong in this debate, that neither side is correct here, that it's all just a matter of perspective. And this is one of the most hard-hitting points of the Civil War, in the sense that in the end, it all simply just comes down to how you view society, how you view the argument of freedom versus security. And so again, the Watcher says that he's very familiar with this concept, the idea of trying to stay out of things, and the recognition that sometimes there is no right decision here, there is no right way to decide who's right and who's wrong. And so from here, we transition to Rikers Island. And as we continue with this story, we of course see that the Invisible Woman is able to help the Secret Avengers Avengers enter Riker's Island when she was able to make them invisible. And so again, what Black Panther, who has joined the fray, says is that, of course, he and Storm were with the Secret Avengers the whole time. He had always sided with them, and that they'll do everything they can in order to ensure that the Secret Avengers come out on top here. But before the group goes too much further, of course, Spider-Man says that his spider sense is going absolutely haywire, that it's going completely nuts. And what we see is that on the other side of the door that they are facing, when it opens up, pours out the entire forces of Tony Stark, as well as the Thunderbolts. And so again, we basically have this confrontation. We have this situation where we have Captain America's team and Tony Stark's team beginning to face off with one another. From here, we see that Tony Stark says that they were aware of the actions of Captain America the entire time. They knew exactly what their plan was because they've had a mole within Captain America's Secret Avengers for quite a while. And Captain America says he knows who it is, that he knows it's Tigra, and they've known about her for quite some time. But he says that Tony Stark's not the only person that has a spy on the other side. And what's revealed to us here is that Hank Pym is not actually Hank Pym. That Hank Pym is Hulkling. He is a shapeshifter, and that he had replaced Hank Pym at the beginning of the story when we had picked up with Hank Pym and Maria Hill in Arizona. Now, what we can most likely derive from this is that the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who had appeared to Hank Pym and told him there was a problem with one of the superheroes was in fact Hulkling in disguise. And once he was able to get Hank Pym by himself, he was able to overpower and incapacitate Hank Pym and then take his place. And Reed Richards realizes this is a massive problem, that if Hulkling was able to access or able to replace Hank Pym and able to copy the voice patterns of Hank Pym, then he's had full authority to everything that Reed Richards and Tony Stark has. And so what we realize is that all the cells are opening up inside of Prison 42, and all the prisoners who were previously being held captive have now been released. And so the forces are basically at an equal point now, where both teams have the same number of people, and both teams are quite capable. And so as the story comes to an end, we see Captain America telling Tony Stark and Reed Richards to close their eyes, because this might hurt. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. So Civil War Frontline issue number 10 is one of the final two tie-ins of the Civil War event, and what we'll see is that this event, this comic book, really takes place before the events of Civil War issue number 7, but as it progresses, it will actually pick up during the events of Civil War issue number 7. Now what we see is that Sally Floyd is meeting with Miss Marvel, and that Miss Marvel has met with Sally Floyd to simply set the record straight. And what we learn here is that Miss Marvel is actually the individual, the liaison for S.H.I.E.L.D. that has been passing information to both Sally Floyd and the NYPD. And what we see is that Miss Marvel confirms with Sally Floyd that someone has been, involved on the inside with altering the programming of Norman Osborn. She says that she has a record, a condensed record of the modifications that were made to Norman Osborn's nani-controllers, and that she was helping Reed Richards determine what time these nani-controllers were activated and who it was that had access to Norman Osborn during these times. In addition, we get a flashback to just after the meeting between Tony Stark and Reed Richards about the possibility of a traitor and the identity of this traitor. And what we see is that Tony Stark informs his immediate team that there is a traitor within their midst, and that after analyzing Norman Osborn's samples before and after he was detained and was released, that someone had made modifications to this. Now, initially the question from Miss Marvel is who this individual is, but Tony Stark says that they've identified who this individual is, but because of reasons of national security, that Tony Stark can't tell them. From here we see that Hank Pym freaks out, and he begins to scream at Tony Stark and tells Tony Stark that they've been with him since the beginning, and that there's really no reason why Tony Stark should not be able to tell them that Hank him feels like if anyone has earned the trust of Tony Stark, it's been these immediate individuals that have been with him and at his side since the beginning of Civil War. From here, we transition back to the meeting with Sally Floyd and Miss Marvel, and Miss Marvel says that they didn't say who this individual was, that they didn't say who the particular traitor was. What we also see is that Sally Floyd begins to sort of question what's going on here. She says it doesn't make sense. Why would Tony Stark and Reed Richards confirm the existence of a traitor within S.H.I.E.L.D. and then not tell anybody who the traitor is? And she goes as far as to speculate whether or not it could be Robert Reynolds the Sentry, and that it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Why would they even suggest that there would be a reason for someone to conspire with Norman Osborn? Miss Marvel says that there really isn't a reason for this, and she can't think of anybody on their side that would conspire with Norman Osborn, but then says that she has to leave in order to keep her cover from being blown. From here, we see that Sally Floyd looks at the envelope, the piece of paper that had been given to her, and is stunned to see that it is really just that simple, that this piece of information has revealed to them, or revealed to her, the person who was behind the tampering of Norman Osborn's nanites. From here, we see her contact Ben Urich, and she says that she has stumbled across a large piece of information involving Tony Stark, which of course tells us that Tony Stark appears to have been the person, the hidden hand behind the adjustment to Norman Osborn's nanite programming. But what we also see is that Ben Urich intends to tell Sally Floyd about his findings involving the stock market adjustments that have been made and the financial gains that Tony Stark has made since the beginning of the Civil War event. The two of them agree to meet at Times Square by 6 o'clock, but Ben Urich adjusts this time and says that he will meet her at 6:15 as there's something that he needs to do first. From here, we see that Ben Urich arrives at the Daily Bugle and interrupts an editorial meeting between J. Jonah Jameson and Robbie Robertson. And what we see is that Ben Urich tells J. Jonah Jameson that he has stumbled across what may very well be the biggest story to have ever been uncovered by anybody at the newspaper. But because of the fact that the Daily Bugle is not set up for the potential ramifications, both legally and financially, for publishing this article, Ben Urich is putting in his immediate resignation. He is quitting his job on the spot. And the reason for this is because Ben Urich feels torn. Ben Urich is kind of in a position where he wants to ensure the story gets published. He wants to ensure the story is put out there, or at the very least, that the information is made available. But he doesn't want to do it in a way that would jeopardize the Daily Bugle financially and legally. And so we see that Robbie Robertson attempts to assuage Ben Urich from quitting, but then we see that J. Jonah Jameson cuts off Robbie Robertson and tells him to be quiet. And then he tells everyone except for Ben Urich to leave. Once everybody's out of the room, we see that J. Jonah Jameson says he understands Ben's position, that Ben is a fine reporter, and that he understands when someone has made up their mind. From here, we see that Ben Urich and J. Jonah Jameson part ways, and J. Jonah Jameson is sad to see that Ben Urich is leaving. At this point, we transition back to Tony Stark, and what we see is that Tony Stark is watching a news broadcast where the report is of a swell, a sort of upsurge in terms of the mobilization of Atlanteans along the Atlantic coast, but that there's no real no real way to determine the size of this particular force or just how much power this force has. And the question that's being asked here, and I guess the sort of argument that's being produced here, is that Tony Stark has pushed the United States towards a conflict with Atlantis by virtue of allowing the Green Goblin loose, and then the Green Goblin engaging in attacks against the Atlanteans. And we of course see that Reed Richards speaks with Tony Stark for a minute and tells Tony Stark that he had chose this road, he had chose this path, and to stay the course, presuming that it'll probably all work out in the end. From here, we switch to Times Square at around 6:15 p.m., and we see that Ben Urich is meeting with Sally Floyd. And as the two of them are getting ready to exchange information, we then pick up with the events of Civil War issue number 7, where the conflict between Captain America's forces and Iron Man's forces has spread to the streets of New York City. And we see various individuals such as Venom and Daredevil, as well as Radioactive Man and others engaging in conflict with one another. We see that there are a multitude of explosions in the background, all sorts of damage is being done, and as a result, Typeface is presumed to have been killed in the conflict. We also see that Ben Urich and Sally Floyd head for the subway station to sort of take refuge against all the conflict and all the action and the explosions that are going on. And after the two of them are able to catch their breath and they are assuming they're innocent, he knows the real reasons behind the entire Civil War event. From here, we transition to Robbie Baldwin at Cumberland Federal Correctional Institute. And what we see here is that Robbie Baldwin is actually meeting with the individual that had shot him. Robbie Baldwin's not being held here, and Robbie Baldwin has actually been released. But the individual that had shot him is, of course, the father of one of the children that had been killed in Stamford, Connecticut. And initially, he's under the impression that he's going to be questioned and he demands an attorney. But once he enters the room, he realizes he's going to be meeting with Robbie Baldwin. From here, we see a great segment in the comic whereby this father begins to scream at Robbie Baldwin and tells Robbie Baldwin that his wife had died years ago, and the only person he really had left in his life was his daughter, and now she's been taken away from him. And the only thing he has left in his life is his hatred for Robbie Baldwin. But for the most part, Robbie Baldwin really has no sympathy for this individual, because the actions of this man have led to Robbie Baldwin being in a position where he constantly has bullet shrapnel pressing against the nerves in his spine. And so as a result, he's in pain 24 hours a day. And so what we see is that Robbie Baldwin meets with a man after burning his costume, burning his old speedball costume. Now she's been taken away from him, and the only thing he has left in his life is his hatred for Robbie Baldwin. But for the most part, Robbie Baldwin really has no sympathy for this individual, because the actions of this man have led to Robbie Baldwin being in a position where he constantly has bullet shrapnel pressing against the nerves in his spine. And so as a result, he's in pain 24 hours a day. And so what we see is that Robbie Baldwin meets with a man after burning his costume, burning his old speedball costume. And this man is presumably building or has built a new suit for Robbie Baldwin. And this new suit is a very grotesque and torturous looking kind of suit. This suit is filled with a multitude of various spikes, some of which are longer than others. And what we see here is that the initial impression on behalf of this individual who has built this suit is that this suit is going to be used to torture someone. This suit is going to be used to inflict a massive amount of pain on somebody else. And when he asked who this individual is supposed to be, who this individual is that Robbie Baldwin intends to inflict so much pain on, Robbie Baldwin says that it's going to be he himself. From here, the suit maker decides that he doesn't want to have any part of this, that he doesn't want to be involved in this. And Robbie Baldwin says that either you can help me with this, or I can end your life. And so this man ends up helping Robbie Baldwin put the suit on. The suit itself actually has 612 spikes. These spikes will dig directly into the body of Robbie Baldwin, and they will cause extreme physical pain and kind of stimulated the powers that he has developed so far. And we see that Robbie Baldwin changes his name, and that he's no longer considering himself to be Robbie Baldwin. He's no longer considering himself to be Speedball, that he has changed his name to Penance. So Civil War Frontline issue number 11 brings an end to the main Civil War conflict, that is to say, the events that have been bubbling up to the ultimate conflict between Captain America and Iron Man. And the way the story is told, and we see that Robbie Baldwin changes his name, and that he's no longer considering himself to be Robbie Baldwin. He's no longer considering himself to be Speedball, that he has changed his name to Penance. So Civil War Frontline issue number 11 brings an end to the main Civil War conflict, that is to say, the events that have been bubbling up to the ultimate conflict between Captain America and Iron Man. And the way the story is told, I would go as far as to say, makes it one of the absolute best stories ever told in Marvel Comics, and probably one of the best comic books that I've ever read in Marvel Comics. The story picks up after the events of the conflict, the fight between Captain America's forces and Iron Man's forces, and the surrender of Captain America. And the story is told from the perspective, again, of Sally Floyd and Ben Urich. And what we see here is that after the event's over, after everything is all said and done, that everybody begins to come out of hiding. All the normal civilians, all the unpowered individuals come out of hiding and attempt to figure out what all's going on. And then we see the total devastation that was wrought at the hands of these superheroes as they engaged in this final battle of the Civil War. And what we see is that for the most part, a large portion of Manhattan is devastated. It's not necessarily totally obliterated, but there's enough damage to be going on with. And from here, we switch back to listening to either Sally Floyd or Ben Urich describe what's going on here, describe this perspective, the view of these events from the perspective of your normal, average, everyday person. And the reality here, the understanding, and I guess the decision that people have come to is that something has to change. Something needs to be done here. That all this conflict really did is underscore the necessity for the Superhuman Registration Act. It was to underscore the need for superhumans to somehow not necessarily have their personal identities made public, but for there to be some way that superheroes have to be held accountable, because this very instance could very well mark the beginning of a much darker future for the world, that if superheroes are allowed to remain unchecked, if those individuals who remain underground as part of the anti-registration movement continue to come into conflict with those who are in support of the superhuman registration, then it's going to produce more conflicts just like these. It's going to produce more problems just like these. In addition, we see that either Sally Floyd or Ben Urich is talking to us about how when Captain America had surrendered, that either superheroes were rounded up, the remaining superheroes were rounded up by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Iron Man's forces, or they simply ran away. And we see that for the most part, history, as she says it, will say that people dodged a bullet, that the American citizenry and even the world as a whole had dodged a bullet by Captain America effectively surrendering, by the Civil War conflict coming to an end. But Sally Floyd says that there was really no time to ponder this concept. There was really no time to think about this because they were too busy trying to put out fires, too busy trying to focus on getting problems remedied, getting the situation or the city back to a state of normalcy, to really focus on exactly how it is that future generations will view the results of this Civil War conflict. What we also learn here is that the death toll of the fight in Manhattan was 53 people, and only 6 of them were superpowered people. Now, this is extremely important when it comes to the Civil War conflict, because for the most part, both sides, at least for the brunt of the conflict, were fighting on behalf of what they thought was right. But throughout the entire Civil War conflict, there was very little, I guess, recognition or very little credence given to the necessity of ensuring that normal humans stayed safe. And we saw this throughout the entire conflict. We saw this as things progressed, as things became more and more serious. From the time that Nitro self-detonated and destroyed a big portion of Stamford, Connecticut, to the time that we ended this Civil War conflict, we never really saw a lot of discussion on how is this going to affect the average person. How does the average person view this? We knew that a majority of people sided with superhuman registration, but for the most part, the story focused on the superheroes. And that, in and of itself, is really the defining aspect, really the defining point of the mindset of those who were leading the superhuman and the anti-superhuman registration movement. From here, we see that Sally Floyd and Ben Urich are at the raft at Rikers Island. And of course, as we previously discussed, the raft is the location where they keep superpowered individuals in order to, provide an adequate form of, either security or maybe just detainment for these individuals. And what we see here is that for the most part, Captain America's not that upset. He's not that sorry about his stance regarding the Civil War event. He recognizes that there are some things that he could have done different. He recognizes that there was a possibility that he could have met with Tony Stark and other individuals to really kind of find a peaceful altercation, as a peaceful resolution to this entire Civil War event. But instead, he went headstrong and decided to fight on the side of freedom. But for Captain America, he feels as though he fought the right fight. He apologizes over the fact that there was so much damage done, and that to a degree, the perception of him and other superheroes may very well have been betrayed as far as their actions go and how they're viewed by humanity. But at the end of the day, he still stands staunch as a supporter of freedom and believes that he was fighting on the right side. From here, we see that Sally Floyd has had enough, and Sally Floyd absolutely let Steve Rogers have it. And this, I would say, points out the inherent flaw, the fundamental issue with Steve Rogers fighting in the 21st century, despite the fact that he was discovered in the 1960s and a majority of his experience regarding worldwide conflict and war took place during World War II. Sally Floyd says that Captain America has no real understanding of what America is about, that he doesn't understand what America is. She asked him if he knows what MySpace is, because at the time of Civil War, MySpace was still a relatively popular form of social media. And Captain America says he doesn't understand what this line of questioning has to do with anything. Sally Floyd says she understands that, but asks Captain America to bear with her. She asks him who won the World Series last year, or who won American Idol last year. And Captain America is not able to understand any of these questions, or at the very least, he's not able to answer any of these questions. And this is the flaw that Sally Floyd points out. That Captain America, despite the fact that he argues to be on behalf of freedom, that he argues to be on the behalf of the American citizenry, doesn't really know anything about America. And this, again, is the inherent flaw of Captain America. Captain America was a World War II era fighter. He was a fantastic soldier, and he was a great beacon of freedom in the world at the time. But from the 1960s, when Captain America was rediscovered, up until this current point, Captain America never moved on. Captain America never got over the fact that things had changed. When Captain America was fighting in World War II, and even then during the early days when he first reappeared in Marvel Comics, villains for the most part were very basic. They were very unimportant with regards to the world as a whole in terms of what it is they wanted to achieve. Very rarely did you ever find villains that were willing to go to the extreme in order to achieve their goals. Periodically you would, but most villains for the most part were very simple, and they were very basic, and they were very comedic. And this is Marvel's way of telling us that these days are gone, that these things are past. If you recall our discussion on Ultron, we had talked about how the Masters of Evil was really kind of being portrayed as this antiquated form of villainry in Marvel Comics. This really touches on that yet again, that Captain America holds himself to an ideology that is no longer existent, that the days are gone when supervillains are effectively bank robbers, when supervillains are attempting to carry out these laughable goals, that supervillains now are extreme, that supervillains now are willing to kill people, kill multitudes of people in order to achieve their goals. In addition, Sally Floyd talks about how in this day and age, you have superheroes that are far beyond the capabilities of anything that Captain America is capable of doing. That you have superheroes that are so powerful that they are a threat to not just the planet Earth, but the universe as a whole. And that maybe, just maybe, the necessity for a Superhuman Registration Act was there. That, if anything, the conflict between Captain America and Iron Man proved that there is a necessity for some form of superhuman registration, because the superhumans are allowed to fight one another, and they are allowed to engage in conflict like this, with this kind of destruction. Then what would future generations do? What kind of lawlessness would the world be looking at if there's no way to hold superheroes accountable for their actions? From here, we see that Ben Urich and Sally Floyd leave Captain America to his thoughts. And Ben Urich is a little surprised to see that Sally Floyd had taken the stance that she did, that she had been so harsh on Captain America. But Sally Floyd's not very apologetic for it and feels as though these were words that Captain America needed to hear, that either Captain America can step into the 21st century, or he's going to become a relic. He's going to become this symbol of an antiquated time in humanity that doesn't really apply to society anymore. From here we get this sort of montage, and what we had seen was that Sally Floyd and Ben Urich were going to meet with Iron Man 10 days after their meeting with Captain America, and it was a chance for them to gather their information and to present their findings to Tony Stark. And over the course of this 10 days, we learned that Ben Urich and Sally Floyd had, of course, quit their positions with their respective newspapers, and they had started their own news reporting agency called Frontlines.com. We, of course, see that Danny and Sally Floyd are together. We see that the Century, Robert Reynolds, comes out in support of superhuman registration, but we also see that Ben Urich and Sally Floyd still maintain contact with those individuals who are underground, with those individuals that are doing what they can to, I guess, maybe circumvent the goals of the pro-registration movement. What we also see is that, for the most part, society is trying to get things cleaned up. Society is trying to piece things together. But we also learned that there has been about a 38% increase in the number of people who have chosen to register. And the reason for this is because the United States is teetering on the edge of war with the Atlanteans. Because the Atlanteans have not forgotten the actions of Norman Osborn at the loading docks. The Atlanteans had not forgotten the actions of Nitro in Stamford, Connecticut, despite the fact that justice had been served on Nitro regarding the fact that he had killed Namorita. We we see, of course, that things are still a little shaky, that things are still a little rough, that the amount of security that's being imposed on society as a whole is something more than people had ever expected, despite the fact that it's being imposed on both superheroes, villains, and normal people. We also see, of course, that some of the superheroes, various individuals gather to offer their condolences and offer their well wishes to those who were killed in the Civil War conflict and are passing on. From here, we see that Sally Floyd and Ben Urich are meeting with Tony Stark, and of course, they state that they have a meeting with Tony Stark when they arrive at Tony's residence. But we also see that Ben Urich tells Sally Floyd to simply stay quiet, that Sally Floyd doesn't need to go on the kind of tirade and the kind of rant that she had gone on when they had met with Captain America. Now, what we see here is effectively a piecing together, the puzzle coming together regarding the actions of Tony Stark during Civil War, because we knew that Tony Stark had engaged in some rather unsavory actions by the time Civil War issue number 7 came around, but we didn't know how all this fit together. We didn't know exactly what it was that he was doing or what the end result of all this was. Now, what we see is that when Ben Urich and Sally Floyd are meeting with Tony Stark says that they are welcome to ask him whatever they want, that he has nothing to hide. And Ben Urich tells Tony Stark to remember that he said that, and Sally Floyd begins.
Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst times, constantly interrupting you with itching, burning, and stinging. Being this uncomfortable is unacceptable. I'm ready. Tremfya works differently for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. With Tremfya, you can get clearer and stay clearer. In fact, most patients who saw 90% clear skin at 28 weeks stayed clearer through 48 weeks. Tremfya works better than Humira at providing clearer skin, and more patients were symptom-free with Tremfya.
Tremfya may lower your ability to fight infections and may increase your risk of infections. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or have symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough. Before starting Tremfya, tell your doctor if you plan to or have recently received a vaccine.
Ask your doctor about Tremfya. Tremfya, because you deserve to stay clearer. Janssen wants to help you explore cost support options for Tremfya.
Find some way to restore the Silver Surfer back to health, but because of his alien physiology, because of the fact that he doesn't require any kind of nourishment to survive, it's kind of a coin flip here in terms of what they can do in order to restore him, or perhaps it's simply that he's just healing himself. And what we see is that Hank Pym says that he's done the best he can up to this point, that given the alien physiology of the Silver Surfer, that he's done everything he knows, and that all they can do is simply just wait. But what he also says is that he has to return to the West Coast Avengers due to what's happened with the disappearance in order to assist them as best he can, and that Doctor Strange may also want to go on to contact the original Avengers and let them know what's going on here. But what we see is that as Hank Pym begins to leave, Doctor Strange seems to be stuck in place. He seems to be kind of frozen in place, and one of his servants attempts to shake him out of it, but Doctor Strange appears to be falling into a trance. And what we see is that his spirit is more or less torn away from his body, that it is taken to a place that seems to exist beyond the physical realm, perhaps in some sort of soul, maybe middle ground or something like that. But what we see is that some unnamed individual, some sort of energy force, has drawn Doctor Strange's essence to him. And what he tells Doctor Strange when he asks what it is that he's doing here, who this individual is that he's here to help save this reality from the insanity of Thanos, but that he can't do it by himself. Doctor Strange replies by saying that if this individual wants him to gather up all these superheroes and all these righteous individuals for a conflict, then he needs to do something to demonstrate who he is, because these individuals most likely will not simply just unite under the single banner of a person that they know nothing about. And what we see this person saying is that he can open his soul, he can expose his soul directly to the soul of Doctor Strange. But the issue here is that because both of their souls will be exposed to one another, that there is an inherent danger here that one of them could be destroyed, or that they could meld into a single person. Doctor Strange says this is a risk that he wouldn't normally take, but because of the grave nature of the circumstances, that he will do whatever he needs to get any kind of help he can. And so what we see is that both of these individual souls are are sort of combined into one, or at the very least, they're able to look into each other's souls. And when Doctor Strange looks into the soul of this unnamed individual, he develops complete and total trust. He now believes him and trusts in him implicitly, and says that he will do anything he needs to in order to assist this individual in any way that he can. From here, we switch to Doctor Doom, and what we see is that Doctor Doom is using his various technology and instrumentation at his disposal to trace the origin, to trace the location of the disappearance, and he traces the energies that caused the Grace disappearance onto the other side of the galaxy, on the far side of the Milky Way galaxy. And so the information that he has here is that, one, he knows where it is, but then two, he's also recognizing some kind of phenomenon that seems to be very similar to the energies that cause the elimination of half the life in the universe, and that this phenomena is emanating from the residence of Doctor Strange. And so what we see Doctor Doom saying here is that this is his universe, these are his people on the planet Earth, and that no one has the right to go in and to effectively begin wreaking havoc without either speaking with him directly or somehow asking for his assistance or involving him in some manner. And so we see Doctor Doom undertaking the task of finding out what it is that has gone on here. But Doctor Doom, again, also has his own motives here, because he sees this as a chance to expand his own power, given the great power that was used for this vast disappearance, and to also expand his scientific knowledge. And so this, for the most part, is the biggest reason why he's here, and we'll see that play out when we get to the actual conflict on the Shrine of Death out in space later on in the Infinity Gauntlet story. From here, we transition to Drax the Destroyer, Eros, and Firelord on Titan. And what we know here is that Mentor, who was the father of Eros and Thanos, is one of the individuals who has vanished from the universe on Titan. And what we know here is that Mentor, who was the father of Eros and Thanos, is one of the individuals who has vanished from the universe. And what we see is that Isaac, again, the autonomous computer system within the fortress of Titan, so to speak, is informing Eros and Firelord and Drax the Destroyer that this is all a universal act, that this is all taking place across the universe, that it's not simply confined to Titan, it's not simply confined to the Milky Way galaxy, that all life in the universe has simply vanished. We then see that Eros simply just disappears. But what we know here is that Eros is not one of the individuals who has simply vanished due to the Great Vanishing, because this has already taken place. What we see is that Eros has been taken by Thanos. Thanos, presumably using the space gem, has transported Eros to his location, and Eros realizes that Thanos is in possession of the power gems. Now, what Eros tells us here is that he's familiar with the Infinity Gems. He's familiar with what it is that they can do. Now, how familiar he is with them is something that Marvel doesn't explain. He simply just tells us that he knows what they are, and he recognizes that with all of them on a single gauntlet, with all of them being wielded by one individual, that this individual possesses a power that is virtually unrivaled within the main Earth 616 Marvel Universe. And so what we see is that Eros begins to look around, and he recognizes Mephisto, but he also recognizes Mistress Death. He recognizes Nebula, who's simply just walking around as a corpse, who is walking this fine line between life and death. Thanos says that this is a family reunion, that he has restored Nebula, or that he's brought Nebula to him, more or less poking fun at the fact that she had presented herself as a granddaughter to him falsely. But he also says that his mate, his lover here, presumably playing the role of his wife, is Mistress Death, and that Mephisto is simply here as an advisor. Eros asks why Mentor isn't here, and Thanos replies that Mentor wasn't invited, nor will he be. And he says that he intentionally ensured that that Mentor was one of the individuals who was eliminated during the Great Vanishing. He made sure that he was one of the people who was simply just blinked out of existence. And the reason why is because Mentor would attempt to find a way to take the Infinity Gauntlet from Thanos. He would try to find some way to bring this conquest to an end, and would be one of the few individuals within the Marvel Universe that would probably be able to do it. Not in the sense of sheer raw power, but in the sense that he would be able to organize forces in such a way that he would be able to achieve this act. But what Thanos says is that ultimate power is now his, that he can reshape the universe with it, and that nothing can interfere with this mission. What we see Eros doing here is playing on this. says that if this is what Thanos wants, then nothing will interfere, that he will do everything he can to help Thanos as best he can. But what we see Thanos realizing here is that Eros is using his powers to manipulate emotions on Thanos. And so Thanos simply says, how poignant, how powerful and charming can Eros be when he can't talk? And so he takes Eros' mouth away. From here, we see Thanos saying that this is how all things shall be from this point forward. Anything that irritates Thanos will simply just cease to be. At this point, we switch back to Captain America, and what we get here is more or less a list, not a full list, but a pretty significant list of which superheroes have gone missing as a result of the Great Vanishing. And this is a pretty important list, and the reason why is because throughout this conflict, a lot of you guys will ask questions like, where's Hercules, where's Archangel, where is the Invisible Woman, the Fantastic Four, where's Night Thrasher, or the Vindicator from Alpha Flight? You guys will ask a lot of these different questions on where these superheroes are. And so what Marvel has done is they've laid out some of the more significant members of the X-Men, the Avengers, Alpha Flight, and various other superhero teams that were relatively popular at the time this story was written, and simply said they're just not here anymore. They've simply just been among the individuals who have been blinked out of existence.
Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst times, constantly interrupting you with itching, burning, and stinging. Being this uncomfortable is unacceptable. I'm ready. Tremfya works differently for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. With Tremfya, you can get clearer and stay clearer. In fact, most patients who saw 90% clear skin at 28 weeks stayed clearer through 48 weeks. Tremfya works better than Humira at providing clearer skin, and more patients were symptom-free with Tremfya.
Tremfya may lower your ability to fight infections and may increase your risk of infections. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or have symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough. Before starting Tremfya, tell your doctor if you plan to or have recently received a vaccine.
Ask your doctor about Tremfya. Tremfya, because you deserve to stay clearer. Janssen wants to help you explore cost support options for Tremfya.
And so what we see here is that Captain America, She-Hulk, and the man standing in the place of Thor, Eric Masterson, analyzing all this information. Now, this idea of Eric Masterson is something that I would like you to keep in the back of your head, because this, again, is not the real Thor. Now, the story in terms of how it is that Eric Masterson begins to undertake the role of Thor and how he takes over this role for a pretty good amount of time is a very, very good story. So I'd like to do that justice, and we'll talk about that when we actually get into our discussion of Thor after we finish various characters when Infinity Gauntlet is over. But for the most part, all we need to do is simply just be aware of the fact that this is not Thor Odin's son. This is simply just Eric Masterson. And what we see is that all these individuals are focusing on the fact that things are, for the most part, very, very bad. That Eric Masterson is trying to undertake the role of Thor, trying to speak like Thor, trying to ensure that he's passed off as Thor, but that everybody else is trying to deal with the fact that some of the most prominent superheroes in the Marvel community are just gone. At this point, we switch to Odin, and what we see is that Odin is in Asgard, and he's wearing the ceremonial eye patch of sorrow. Now, this is something that a lot of people get confused. In the movie of Thor, we saw that that Anthony Hopkins was wearing an eye patch. The eye patch is worn as a ceremonial thing. It's not something that Odin actually has to wear. He hasn't actually lost an eye. And for the most part, what we see here is that Odin has called together the Sky Fathers. Now, the Sky Fathers are what we would consider to be the old gods. These are people like Zeus, Osiris of Egypt. These are what we would look at to say that older parts of society, older parts of the world, generations and thousands of years ago, these were the people, these were the gods that ancient humanity worshipped. But in the Marvel Universe, these are actual beings. These are true beings. They may have been forgotten over the years. They may no longer be worshipped by people over the years, but it doesn't take away from the fact that they are real and they have a vast amount of power. And as these individuals form under the name of the Sky Father, they have, of the Sky Fathers, they have a significant amount of power. And what Odin does here is Odin calls them together, bands them together, and says that because of this great power, because of this great threat, that they need to fight together in order to try to defeat Thanos. But for the most part, this would be a laughable conquest at best, because the Sky Fathers, despite their vast power, have absolutely no ability to thwart the power Thanos at all in any way. From here, we transition to Wendell Vaughn to Quasar, and all we see with this bit of the story is that Quasar has simply arrived to a predestined or a arranged set of coordinates by Epoch. And what he simply says here is that he's just supposed to wait, that Quasar is simply just supposed to hold out here, that he's not supposed to do anything until he's instructed to. From here, we switch back to the story of Ralph, who has now undertaken the role of Pip the Troll. And for the most part, Pip the Troll is just the sidekick of Adam Warlock. And so all this really does is confirm that Adam Warlock is now he's now rejoining the physical Marvel universe. And what we see Pip the Troll here doing is simply just waiting for Adam Warlock to wake up, to come out of his cocoon. And as he's waiting, there's some kind of an explosion in the next room that throws him out of his seated position and into the TV, or simply just to a different part of the room. And when the explosion ends, he gets up and he goes into the next room and asks this individual, since they can't stay here anymore, where it is that they're supposed to go. And this individual replies by saying, after Thanos. From here, we switch back to Dr. Doom at the residence of Dr. Strange. And what we see is that the Silver Surfer has now woken up. He's now come to. And Dr. Doom has his Doombots restraining Dr. Strange. And what we see is Dr. Strange pleading with Dr. Doom, saying that he is mentally in dangers, that he doesn't really understand. He doesn't really know what's going on here. But what we see is that the Silver Surfer tries to stop Dr. Doom. He tries to overpower Dr. Doom. But Dr. Doom uses his power to overpower the Silver Surfer. Now, under normal circumstances, this would not happen. Dr. Doom would not be able to overpower the Silver Surfer despite his vast power. But the Silver Surfer is in a weakened position here. He's very, very weak, and so he doesn't have his full physical strength. Otherwise, he would easily be able to stop Dr. Doom. From here, we see that Dr. Doom turns his power against Dr. Strange, and what he wants to know is what's happened here. He wants to know everything that has taken place as far as this great disappearance and the forces behind it. Now, Dr. Strange initially doesn't say anything. Dr. Strange initially doesn't speak. But what we see is that before Dr. Strange can say anything, there's an explosion behind them. And we see that Dr. Doom, the Silver Surfer, and Dr. Strange all look around. At this point, we see Adam Warlock has arrived. And Adam Warlock simply just replies by saying that in his time, he was called Adam Warlock, and that they may also do so if they feel inclined. From here, we switch back to Thanos, and what we see is that Thanos is using the power of the Infinity Gauntlet to more or less either psychologically or possibly even physically torture Eros and Nebula. And again, he's doing this as a way to satisfy, to please Mistress Death. But Mistress Death doesn't really seem to find this the slightest bit interesting. She doesn't find it at all satisfying. It's simply just something she pays no attention to, or doesn't really give any kind of credence to. From here, we see Eros, after the torture is ended, looking at Thanos and coming to this realization that the Infinity Gauntlet has driven Thanos insane, that this power has driven him out of his mind, and that on a whim, due to his insanity, he could simply just eliminate the universe. And so this is when Eros really grasps what it is that's going on here, and grasps the danger of the situation. From here, we transition back to Adam Warlock and Dr. Strange, Dr. Doom, and the Silver Surfer. And what we see Adam Warlock saying is more or less explaining how it was that Thanos was able to gain the Infinity Gauntlet, how it was that he was able to gain this vast power, and that he's arrived here in order to help bring an end to these schemes. Dr. Strange realizes that Adam Warlock was the one that communicated with him earlier when he came to this understanding of what it meant to undertake the role of uniting all of these superheroes. We also see Dr. Doom commenting and saying that this is a set of circumstances whose peril, whose danger almost rivals that of the coming of the Beyonder. Now, Dr. Doom says that it does rival the coming of the Beyonder, but there's a vast difference here. The Beyonder had power that dwarfed anything that the Infinity Gauntlet could do. He was from an entirely different universe, entirely different multiverse, and he had incredible power and could do pretty much anything that he wanted to. But we'll talk more about him again when we get into the Secret Wars 1 and 2 and the Beyonder. But what we see is that Adam Warlock says that this is going to be difficult. This is going to be a fight that will very well cost the lives of some individuals and will require 100% of everybody, because it's going to and sort of moving forward. But what we'll see is that, again, this is not necessarily acquiescence by Dr. Doom so much as it is Dr. Doom just biding his time. What we also see is the Silver Surfer commenting on whether or not Adam Warlock is truly the person that should lead them. That is Adam Warlock really the best choice here? That Adam Warlock seems vastly different from the Adam Warlock that he had met in the Soul World. And so, because no one really knows anything about him, no one really knows anything about his motivations other than what he claims his motivations to be. From here, we transition back to Thanos, and again, we see Thanos manipulating reality to torture Eros and Nebula. And again, he's becoming extremely angry here. He's becoming extremely frustrated because Mistress Death will not acknowledge him. Mistress Death will not return his affections. And we see him yelling at her. We see him screaming at her, asking what it is that it would take to please her, that he's done everything that she's asked. He's given her the entire universe, that he would do anything in order to make her love him, that all he asks here is that she simply just use her voice and speak his name aloud, and that would be enough. And so what we see is that Thanos, in his anger, lets off an energy blast. He lets off this massive force of energy in all directions. And what we see is that the first thing that encounters, or that is encountered by this energy blast, is a 20-million-year-old red giant. And what this red giant does is simply just destroys, simply just explodes, and that's the end of it. From here, we see some kind of spaceship traveling through the cosmos, and the planet that the spaceship is approaching is destroyed. And we see an individual here telling us that the wrath of Thanos, the supreme being, is something to behold. That this planet is the second planet to be destroyed as this being was traveling to it. That is the second banquet that has been robbed from him. And what we see is that this person is Galactus. And Galactus is again attempting to satiate his hunger, but also recognizes that the vast power that Thanos has here is something that cannot be ignored. That is going to require that Galactus go through the process of bringing together a multitude of forces in terms of the cosmic entities in order to attempt to bring an end to the power that Thanos has here. And that the issue here is that the emanations that are being released here, that the power that is being displayed here by Thanos will reach the planet Earth, and that it will only contain about 2% of its power, but it will be a massive amount of energy nonetheless. And so what we see is that we transition to the planet Earth, and we see that Cloak, who is one half of the team Cloak and Dagger, is by himself. The Dagger is gone. She is one of the individuals who has simply been blinked out of existence. And that Cloak feels as though, because his other half is gone, that while they were linked, while they were kind of like two halves of the whole, as he describes it, that he doesn't really feel like he has a reason to go on. But what we see is that he finds this reason to continue as this force that was emitted by Thanos reaches the planet Earth and shakes the entire planet, crumbling several cities and wiping out the Japanese islands. And of course, we see that Cloak uses his ability to save various humans, to save them from their impending deaths of falling off buildings or else being crushed by rubble. From this point, we transition back to Doctor Strange, Silver Surfer, Doctor Doom, and Adam Warlock. And what we see here is that these individuals are trying to deal with the aftermath of this. They're trying to understand the aftermath of what's going on here. That the power that Thanos has demonstrated, despite being on the other side of the galaxy, is a power that most of them couldn't really even fathom. And that it will take an incredible organization, an incredible upheaval for all of them to be able to successfully go toe-to-toe with Thanos. And so what we see is a comment here. We see the question being asked, what was that? What was that energy blast? From here, we're going to bring an end to this video, and in the next video, we're going to pick up with battle formations, preparations for war, and we'll see that we're more or less seeing superheroes being organized. We're seeing superheroes being brought together by Adam Warlock as they begin the preparations for taking on Thanos.
Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst times, constantly interrupting you with itching, burning, and stinging. Being this uncomfortable is unacceptable. I'm ready. Tremfya works differently for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. With Tremfya, you can get clearer and stay clearer. In fact, most patients who saw 90% clear skin in 28 weeks. Tremfya works better than Humira at providing clearer skin and more
Before starting Tremfya, tell your doctor if you plan to or have recently received a vaccine.
Ask your doctor about Tremfya. Tremfya, because you deserve to stay clearer. Janssen wants to help you explore cost support options for Tremfya.
So as we begin our discussion on Infinity Gauntlet issue number 3, I think you guys are really going to enjoy this comic, and the reason why is because what we'll see taking place over the course of this battle formations, preparations for war, we're going to be seeing a plan put together, and it won't be until the end of the comic that we actually understand the true nature of this plan. But what this is also the last issue that we have talking, and it'll be the last issue before we actually get into the main discussion, the main conflict that takes place between Thanos and all of these superheroes leading up to the end of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. And what we see here as the story begins to pick up is that we're back with Dr. Doom, Adam Warlock, the Silver Surfer, and Doctor Strange. And Dr. Doom is commenting on how he agrees, picking up immediately from the last discussion that now is the time for action. But Adam Warlock says no. Adam Warlock says there are forces at work here that Dr. Doom just doesn't understand, and he just can't possibly grasp, and that rushing into action like this would almost guarantee certain doom. And so he says that he has a intricate and a very innovative plan that's unfolding here, and that the slightest disturbance could very well lead to the world. What we also see Doctor Strange commenting is saying that he agrees with Adam Warlock that they have to trust him, that Doctor Doom and Silver Surfer, they have to come to this understanding that Adam Warlock knows what he's doing, that tremendous powers are gaining here for this final confrontation. And he more or less repeats the words of Adam Warlock here, saying that that premature action could lead to total destruction. And so Doctor Doom acquiesces. Doctor Doom says that it's driving him nuts waiting to take action, but that for the time being, he's willing to put this off. He's willing to go ahead and hold things. Now from here, we see Adam Warlock saying that it's time to make preparations, that it's time to go about the business of moving towards the next step of his master plan. And so he calls on Doctor Strange, and what we see Doctor Strange doing is teleporting Adam Warlock, Doctor Doom, and the Silver Surfer to the Avengers headquarters. And at the Avengers headquarters, we have She-Hulk, Captain America, and Thor. And they're trying to come to an understanding of what's going on here. They're trying to deal, again, as a follow-up to the last video, of what's happened since the disappearance of various superheroes. Adam Warlock and Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange and the Silver Surfer appear. The immediate idea is that Doctor Strange is keeping Strange company. He is with people who you would never normally form an alliance with. But what we see is that immediately Adam Warlock and Doctor Strange begin to convince She-Hulk, Thor, and Captain America that the situation is so dire that Doctor Doom is not here to fight against them, that Doctor Doom is here to fight with them. And so when the question is asked what the intention is here for Adam Warlock, why it is that he's here, and why it is that such strange alliances have been formed, Adam Warlock replies by simply saying that they're raising an army. From here, we transition to Black Widow, and Black Widow doesn't necessarily give us a huge in-depth discussion here, but because Black Widow is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I felt it would be relevant to include her in this discussion. And all we really see is that she's one of the people on the sideline. She's kind of in the background. She's doing the best she can to help save lives as a result of the energy shockwave that had reached the planet Earth and the devastation that it had caused. We see that she's jumping out of a building, out of a burning building, saving a baby. And for the most part, this is kind of what we would expect to see with her character, because she doesn't really have any superpowers. She's just more or less a super spy with all kinds of gadgets at her disposal. But then we switch and we see that there's a woman who is falling out of a building, who's hanging on for dear life. And Black Widow goes with an attempt to try to save her, but the building collapses and crumbles before Black Widow can get there. And so again, this is just starting. This is Marvel injecting a little bit of realism here and saying that with stories like these, with comics like these, that not everybody makes it out the other side, and not everybody survives. And so what we see is that this woman who was tumbling to her death did in fact die, that she was crushed by the rubble and the debris, and even if not necessarily crushed, she was certainly burned to death. And the way that we see Black Widow dealing with this, I think, is a great testament to the human nature of her character, the difference between her and a lot of other superheroes that you see in the Marvel community, where she just can't accept the fact that it's enough. She says that not enough. That her best just simply isn't enough here. From here, we switch to Doctor Strange and Adam Warlock. And what we see Doctor Strange doing is calling upon superheroes, calling upon various individuals to gather, to bring their powers with them due to the necessity of them and their powers with regards to the upcoming conflict. And the first two people that we see arriving here are Iron Man and Spider-Man. From here, we switch to the arrival of new characters. We see, of course, Wolverine coming here. We see Drax the Destroyer. And again, Drax the Destroyer serves the purpose of, I guess, trying to, or being able to hunt down and track Thanos no matter where he is in the cosmos. And due to the fact that Adam Warlock has Silver Surfer on his side, and Silver Surfer has cosmic awareness, it's really not the ability of Drax to locate Thanos that they're interested in. It's the sheer raw power that he possesses that they're interested in. Who we also see showing up here is Fire-Lord. Now again, we haven't done a big discussion on Fire-Lord, but Fire-Lord was one of the heralds of Galactus, and so for the most part, he was one of the individuals who served the same purpose as the Silver Surfer. The next person we see showing up is Nova of the New Warriors, and this is due to the fact that Nova is the only one at this moment who is able to tap into the full might of the Nova Force. And so for him, for Adam Warlock and Silver Surfer and the opposing forces, Nova is really a necessity here. He's someone they absolutely need. The next person here is Namor the Submariner, and of course Namor the Submariner has super strength, but for the most part, in terms of his relation to characters like Drax the Destroyer or even the Incredible Hulk, he's not all that strong. But his military, his ability to plan tactics, his military experience, and the conquest that he's had over the course of his life will definitely be an asset to this team. The next person we see is Cloak. And again, all Cloak really does here is serve the purpose of being someone that can teleport people over distances. Now, to my knowledge, I don't think Marvel has ever established the fact that Cloak can teleport people over an infinite amount of distance. And so they're not really looking for Cloak here to be someone to teleport everybody all the way to the other side of the galaxy to fight Thanos. They simply have him here because he could be an individual that could teleport groups of people around, or could serve some kind of purpose, or possibly even swallow Thanos entirely. From here, we see the remaining members of this group coming together. We see Cyclops of X Factor, because remember, at this time, the X-Men were a different group. It was giant-sized X-Men, and X Factor was composed of the original X-Men team. And the way it appears to us here is that of the either original members of the X-Men or the current members of the X-Men, Wolverine and Cyclops seem to be the only ones who were left alive, or at the very least, the only ones who were called upon. We also see the Scarlet Witch arriving here to meet with the Vision. We see the Incredible Hulk being invited, but the Incredible Hulk doesn't actually show up at first. And the reason why the Incredible Hulk doesn't show up, as it's explained to us by Tony Stark, is because the Avengers had previously turned their back on the Incredible Hulk due to the fact that, much like we saw with the Illuminati when he was exiled from the planet Earth, the Incredible Hulk was being too dangerous for himself. He was out of control, and so the Avengers hadn't necessarily abandoned him entirely, but they had more or less kind of handed him his hat and shaken him out. But what we see Iron Man and Captain America saying here is that if he's reformed, he can be one of the Avengers again. He can come back. The Incredible Hulk overhears this and says that'll be enough for now, and so he joins the group of superheroes who are going to fight against the forces of Thanos. And what Adam Warlock tells us here is that this army is now complete, and so the individuals that we see that have arrived here appear to be the only individuals who were either left or have been invited to become part of this.
Plaque psoriasis can be relentless. Your plaques are always there at the worst times, constantly interrupting you with itching, burning, and stinging. Being this uncomfortable is unacceptable. Tremfya works differently for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. With Tremfya, you can get clearer and stay clearer. In fact, most patients who saw 90% clear skin at 28 weeks stayed clearer through 48 weeks. Tremfya works better than Humira at providing clearer skin, and more patients were symptom-free with Tremfya.
Tremfya may lower your ability to fight infections and may increase your risk of infections. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or have symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough. Before starting Tremfya, tell your doctor if they plan to or have recently received a vaccine.
Ask your doctor about Tremfya. Tremfya, because
of Thanos, to fight against Thanos against his Infinity Gauntlet. And what we see Doctor Doom saying is that before Captain America goes any further, that the question has to be asked here, is Adam Warlock the best person to lead this group? Dr. Strange replies by asking there's no discussion here. This is pretty much all there is. There's no two ways about it. But Dr. Doom says that he's the only person that has the ruthlessness, the cunningness, and the guile to lead this group. And of course, for the most part, everybody is against him on this. Captain America says no way. They all say that this is not the case. And so Captain America replies to Dr. Strange simply saying that deep down inside, Dr. Doom, he knows that Adam Warlock's the only one that can really stop Thanos, that Adam Warlock is the only one that can really lead them to victory. And so Dr. Doom simply acquiesces again and says, okay. At this point, we see that Adam Warlock says that there's going to be yet another gathering, that these are the only individuals that have shown up here, and that he's also coming together with more allies. And when the question is asked what these allies are, Adam Warlock simply replies by saying cosmic allies, indicating to us that he's also gathering the cosmic entities together as a force to fight against the power of Thanos. What we also see is that Adam Warlock and Silver Surfer travel to the other side, to the far corner of the galaxy. And the reason for this, as we'll pick up, is that they're meeting with Quasar and the cosmic entities in order to form a team, in order to come together for the purpose of bringing everybody together to fight against the power of Thanos. And when they arrive, that's exactly what we're told. What we're told is that that Elon informs Adam Warlock that the cosmic entities had simply been waiting for him. They were simply waiting for him to arrive. And when he does, we see that almost all of them are gathered here. Now, there are some cosmic entities that aren't here, but for the most part, almost all of them, or the most prominent ones, are. We see Kronos, we see the Living Tribunal, we see Master Order and Lord Chaos, the Stranger, and of course the Sylvanas that we previously discussed. So we won't go into it too much longer. But two of the most notable members here that I would like you to pay attention to are Eternity and the Living Tribunal. And the reason why, as is explained to us, is because more or less what they're calling together here is a trial with the Living Tribunal overseeing. And the whole reason for this is because, again, the Living Tribunal exists to ensure that cosmic balance is in place, that no one force becomes such a threat to its universe that it could result in the destruction of that universe or other universes should its dangers spill over. And what we see Eternity saying here is that he is the embodiment of all that is, of everything within the universe. And that Thanos attempts to usurp this position from him. The Living Tribunal says that he's considered this matter, but that he cannot interfere. And the reason why is because Thanos only strives to replace eternity as the embodiment of all reality, and that natural selection is one of the oldest truths, that the strong replace the weak, and that if eternity isn't strong enough to oppose someone who wants to challenge him and take his place, then eternity should perish and the new force should take its place. And so the Living Tribunal says that he cannot interfere, that he will not become involved in this matter. And this is a very big issue here. And the reason why is because if the Living Tribunal had ruled on the side of eternity, then the Living Tribunal simply could have arrived at Thanos' location and blinked him out of existence despite the power that Thanos had, or he could have simply just stripped him of the Infinity Gauntlet, because as we discussed with our discussion on the Living Tribunal as a lead up to the Thanos quest and the Infinity Gauntlet event, we had talked about how during the Infinity Crusade, during the Infinity Watch storyline, that Adam Warlock had approached the Living Tribunal. And the Living Tribunal, after seeing the power that Adam Warlock possessed and the anger that he had displayed, had simply just eliminated all the power of the Infinity Gauntlet within that vicinity. From here, we see that Eternity is more or less leaving, that he's kind of going off on his own. Now, why he's doing this and what he's doing is actually something that we don't know, and we won't see him again for quite some time. But what we see is Adam Warlock saying that it doesn't matter that Eternity is not here. What he says is that all of them are here so that they can fight together, so that all these cosmic entities can gather and oppose the force of Thanos. But then we see the Watchers saying that he cannot be counted among these individuals that will fight against Thanos, that he is a Watcher, and due to his creed, he is unable to interfere, that he can only observe Galactus says, why should they follow one such as him into battle? And so what we see is Adam Warlock saying that he is here for the purpose of that he's here for the purpose of leading them into the conflict, and that's the only thing Galactus needs to concern himself about. Galactus says that he does not heed empty words from mortals, from people that he considers to be beneath him, and Adam Warlock simply replies by saying Galactus is a fool. From here we see Galactus attempts to destroy Adam Warlock, that he blasts him with a vast amount of energy. Galactus then begins to talk with his fellow cosmic entities here and simply say that they've gathered that their forces should be enough to defeat Thanos. But then we see that Adam Warlock is actually alive. Adam Warlock is on the helmet of Galactus and asks him since when it was that Galactus allowed his anger and his wrath to more or less override his judgment. That Galactus is known for being one of the most logical beings in the universe, and that surely Galactus can determine, surely he can find here that the power, the entire might of all these cosmic entities put together is still insufficient for defeating Thanos. And so we see that Master Order, Lord Chaos, and various other cosmic entities band together against Galactus and say that they are siding with Adam Warlock. From here, we transition back to Thanos at the Shrine of Death, and what we see Thanos saying is that his enemies are coming for him, that his enemies are going to attempt to destroy him, and he asks Mistress Death if she will stand by his side. But Mistress Death again spurns Thanos, and she seems to turn her back on him. And Thanos simply replies by saying this is exactly as he had expected, that he had deluded himself into believing that she could ever really care for him. And so he says that being a supreme being means that he has no need to suffer in a void of affection, that he does not have to go alone, that he does not have to rule without Mistress Death, that with all power, all things are possible. And so what he does is create a being named Taraxia. And Taraxia is, as he describes it, everything Mistress Death is not. That she's everything that Thanos longs for. That she is the love that he wants from Mistress Death. That she is a representation of what he considers to be beautiful. And he says that there's really no need here. There's no need for Mistress Death anymore. That Thanos has found his one true mate. But what we see is that this isn't true. That Thanos doesn't really believe this. That Thanos is more or less still in love with the idea of Mistress Death and is still angry at the fact that she will not return his affection. From here, we see that Adam Warlock is preparing forces. He's preparing these superheroes for the roles that they're going to have to face. He says that the battle that's coming is going to be fierce and it's going to be awesome, and that it may very well cost the lives of several superheroes, but that's the price that they have to pay. He says that Doctor Strange has conjured mystic conduits that are going to lead them to particular places, to particular locations where they need to be due to the plan that Adam Warlock has created in order for this to succeed, and that if any of them deviate from this plan, that it could very well lead to the ruin of the universe, as well as all of the superheroes who are fighting at this point in time. What we also see is that a spell has been cast that's going to allow these forces to breathe within the depths of space for 60 minutes without any kind of assistance. And this will become very important because one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when we get into the coming conflict of the Infinity Gauntlet is that everything that's going to take place will take place over 60 minutes, and we will see when that 60 minutes ends. We'll know when that 60 minutes comes to an end. That's one of the things that Marvel will tell us, is that the 60 minutes is over. And so what he also says here is that Doctor Strange is going to be in the background. Doctor Strange is going to be monitoring everything, and he's going to be keeping Adam Warlock aware